Chapter 83. The internet provides you with wonderful novels to read. More than a dozen people couldn't even touch the hem of Jiang Pingji's clothes, let alone cause her any trouble. They had no combat discipline, no sense of cooperation, and no tactics to speak of. They only knew how to rush around like headless flies. Not only could they not exert the strength of 1 + 1 = 2, but they were also holding each other back. Jiang Pingji had no difficulty in dealing with them. Corpses were constantly being thrown to the ground with dull thuds. Suku opened his eyes slightly and saw Jiang Pingji in a plain brown robe strolling among the crowd. Her movements were simple, but she had the demeanor of a master. "I've never seen anyone weaker than you. You want to suppress bandits? Why don't you go buy an embroidery brush and stay in the house to learn how to do needlework? With this kind of ability, if I take you to suppress bandits, you won't even be enough to kill one person." Jiang Pingji had perfect control of her strength. She didn't injure or cripple them. However, they wouldn't be able to stand up and fight with her for a while. His venomous tongue was unleashed, stomping on wherever it hurt. The men were red in the face as if living in the world was a waste of food, and committing suicide out of shame would pollute the land. "Look at you. You're all so weak. Your legs are like noodles. You can't even stand straight. You'll fall if you stumble. You'll lie on the ground and wail for a long time. Did you not eat enough during the day? Or did you lose your body on a woman at night? Or did you sleep too much in bed?" Jiang Pingji sarcastically said. She never paid attention to her limits, so she inadvertently used dirty words. Suku, a young boy, blushed. He looked at Jiang Pingji as if he was looking at a monster. How could such vulgar words come out of the mouth of a noble Langjun who was raised in a noble family? Jiang Pingji acted as if nothing had happened to Suku. She didn't think what she said was wrong. Was this standard vulgar, dirty, and violent? Then what about the fact that she had drunk alcohol and won the championship of the Dirty Stories competition? She tried to use elegant words to express herself. The system, which had been happy a moment ago, was now paralyzed on the sofa and couldn't take care of itself. With such a host, it was already a salted fish. The bystanders were dumbstruck, but there was a group of people who were so excited that they couldn't stop. Notifications flooded the screen, flipping page after page. Domineering president, rewarded 1314 kidney apples. Viewer, come and hit me if you're not convinced, rewarded 11 sets of 520 blue and white side items. Viewer, stupid network card crippled, rewarded 99 blue enchantresses. The most eye-catching thing was a huge firework that exploded on the virtual screen. The cool special effects almost occupied the entire screen. Viewer, so poor that only have money left, tipped a luxurious private yacht. Viewer, so poor that only have money left, tipped a luxurious private yacht. Viewer, so poor that only have money left, tipped a luxurious private yacht. The same announcement was repeated 9 times. The entire live broadcast room was silent for a second before it exploded. Tudu Feichio, wow, he's really a nouveau riche. He's so poor that he only has money left. 9 luxury private yachts. Cafeteria Dafinanti, nouveau riche, please hang me wherever you point me. Penguin girl, although there are very few people in our live broadcast room, there are many people who are stupid and rich. Smiley face 3, angle, underscore a luxurious private yacht was equivalent to 1,000 popularity points, which required 1,000 streaming coins. If converted to the currency of their dimension, it would be 1,000 renminbi. The nouveau riche rewarded 9 yachts in a row, which meant that he didn't even blink and directly threw in 9,000. 4 other popular live broadcast rooms, this bit of reward was nothing, but for this new live broadcast room, it was a rare large amount. Jiang Pingji was stunned. Looking at the points of popularity in her account, she secretly raised her eyebrows. She still didn't show her emotions. So poor that only have money left. The streamer is great. Reward her. Look, the nouveau riche was so indifferent. However, Jiang Pingji laughed coldly in her heart and threw it to the back of her head. There was no other reason. When the special firework reward filled the entire screen, the system issued a live broadcast task backstage. A song of colorful clothes dancing, the beauty's voice spread everywhere. Today there is a viewer, poor that only have money left, who wishes for the streamer to dance to a song. The dance is moving and the duration is not less than 10 minutes. Task reward, 9 luxurious private helicopters. Accept B, consider rejecting. The prices of the luxurious private helicopters and the luxurious private yachts were the same. They were virtual reward currency in the live broadcast room. In other words, if Jiang Pingji was willing to accept the task and dance in front of the live broadcast audience for 10 minutes to satisfy the nouveau riche and give a high evaluation, she could receive another 9,000 points of reward. After deducting the system's bonus, she could still get half of it. She didn't expect that before she could choose the semi-interactive mode or the fully interactive mode, the nouveau riche had already seriously studied the rules of the live broadcast room and issued a live broadcast task with a high reward. This was unique to the designated live broadcast mode. Before the system could scream in excitement, Jiang Pingji had already chosen to reject the task. The reward stored in the system was instantly refunded when the nouveau riche issued the task. Thus, its scream was like a duck that had been strangled by its neck. It stopped abruptly. It was hilarious. The system wailed, "Host, that's a total of 9,000 points of popularity. You can get it just by dancing." Jiang Pingji sternly stopped it. "Shut up." At the same time, a bullet screen notification was posted in her mind. "Host V, thank you for the love and enthusiasm of the audience, but the live broadcast room refuses to accept any content of the designated live broadcast mode. It's a matter of principle and has nothing to do with anything else." Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jiang Pingji briefly explained the voting rules for the semi-interactive mode and the fully interactive mode. Although the live broadcast without a clear theme was very interesting, it also lacked a sense of anticipation. After a long time, people would get tired. Moreover, there was no guarantee that interesting things would happen every time the live broadcast was free. Sometimes she felt that her days were boring and moldy, not to mention the audience sitting in front of the screen watching the live broadcast. The novelty of the live broadcast room could maintain the curiosity in their hearts, but it could not sustain their passion. Although Jiang Pingji was expressionless and there was no flaw in her eyes or expression, Su Ku, who was beside her, sensitively noticed that his Longjuan's good mood was inexplicably covered with a layer of dense fog. She seemed to be extremely unhappy. Could it be that Langjun was extremely disappointed in the people lying on the ground? Su Ku could not help but think more, but before he could figure it out, Jiang Pingji had already stepped forward and taken away the sandalwood fan that he was keeping. "You make arrangements for these people. We will go back to the mansion to discuss this at night. We will officially start training tomorrow. If they are still so useless, there is no need to keep them and waste food." Jiang Pingji's face was cold and stern, as if she was suppressing some kind of emotion. It made people subconsciously lower their heads, not daring to make a sound. Chapter 84. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. For some unknown reason, Lu Shi trusted and indulged his daughter. Apart from her studies, he rarely interfered with anything else. However, he still wanted to know the details. He was afraid that she would be taken advantage of. Obviously, Lu Shi's worry was unnecessary. How could Jiang Pingji be taken advantage of? Su Ku was a busy man. First, he made arrangements for the servants in the farm. Then he came back and had a heart-to-heart talk with Jiang Pingji. Before he could eat a hot meal, he was called over by Lu Shi, the head of the family. Because of the fear, Su Ku did not hide the details. He was eloquent and his narration was clear. Lu Shi sat at the head of the table and listened with his eyes closed. He seemed to be enjoying it. Behind the screen, Madame Hu smiled. Erling has really made a name for himself. Cousin can feel more at ease now. His daughter was praised, but as the head of the household, he could not be too proud. He could not hide his smile, but he still had to be humble. However, when Su Ku told her about how Jiang Pingji had provoked many of the reservists and said that she would send them to exterminate bandits after the training, Madame Hu was so shocked that she almost threw the snack back onto the plate. Lu Shi opened his eyes abruptly, and there was a hint of astonishment in his eyes. Madame Hu could not care less about her elegance. She said sternly, "A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. How could Erling be so impulsive?" In this regard, Lu Shi did not say anything. He only had a look of realization on his face that others could not understand. No one knew what he was thinking. Madame Hu's angry voice did not reach his ears. He felt like he was floating as if he was in another dimension. After a long time he gathered his thoughts. His face was pale. "All right, Lanting is no longer a 3-year-old. You know what you're doing." Lu Shi interrupted Madame Hu's order to stop Jiang Pingji. There was tiredness and an indescribable sharpness between his brows. Maybe this is fate. He went straight back to the main courtyard. The candlelight in the corridor flickered and flickered, elongating his shadow. Sitting in front of a few tables, Lu Shi spread out a great universal geographical map of Dongqing. A place was clearly marked on it. It was Hu County, which Lu Shi had once governed. He stared at Hu County for an hour, clenching his fists so tightly that a few crescent moon marks were left on his palms. After a long time, he said to the maidservant waiting outside the room, Go and invite Lanting here. In ancient times, people worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Jiang Pingji was ready to go to bed with the help of her maids. Let's go. Don't let father wait too long. She suddenly received a message from Lu Shi. She frowned and got up to take the warm and heavy cloak from Takshu. She put it on. She didn't know if it was because Lu Shi had returned, or if it was because of the revival of spring, which had injected vitality into the desolate Lu mansion. The landscape in the courtyard was a lot more luxuriant than when she had first arrived. It was just that the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The light was dim and the scenery was flickering. It was rather strange. When she reached the main courtyard, she bowed to Lu Shi. He waved at her and said gently, "Lanting, come forward." She took a few steps forward and sat down beside the table. She found her father staring at a great universal geographical map of Dongqing. Although it was a great universal geographical map, it was actually quite simple. Not to mention the rivers and mountains, even the size of the map was drawn in a mess. "Lanting, do you know where the county I was in was?" Lu Shi pushed the lamp on the table toward Jiang Pingji so that she could see more clearly. "I've been away from Hejian for the past few years. I've wondered if Lanting has any resentment. But I had no choice but to temporarily leave my homeland and my children." Jiang Pingji looked up at him suspiciously. She didn't understand why Lu Shi suddenly brought up this topic. "Father, you were in this place. It's called Hu County, but it's as big as a prefecture." Jiang Pingji answered the first question and avoided the second one. After all, she was not Lu Lanting. She was in no position to answer and she couldn't give an answer. Lu Shi caressed the Hu County on the great universal geographical map with his fair fingertips. "Yes, Hu County. Before I took office, it was a famous barren land in Dongqing. The government sent many high-ranking officials there, but they all died halfway or in office. It was a place of no return." It was not a bad thing to say that Hu County was barren. Since the end of the Xia dynasty, it had been a hard bone to chew. The land was vast, but it was overgrown with weeds. There had been a continuous drought for 10 years without a single drop of rain, which made it difficult for every household to survive. To survive, every able-bodied man in every household became roving bandits. They looted everywhere and sold their children. Those who had the means to escape from Hu County early. Even if they were worse off than pigs or dogs, it was better than being tortured in the hell that was Hu County. Not only that, but the disaster relief silver and food distributed by the court were exploited and bullied by the gentry. When they reached the hands of the people, they were left with rice mixed with 99% soil. It was the same every year. The gentry ran amok, the officials protected each other, and the roving bandits ran rampant. After the fall of the Xia dynasty, Dongqing took over the hard bone. Before Lu Shi, there was no lack of righteous officials who wanted to govern, but there was no exception. They all died. As a result, Lu Shi became the longest-serving county chief in Hu County. He was even worshipped by the local people as a god. "What happened to you, father? Why were you sent to such a dangerous place?" Jiang Pingji frowned. Hu County was notorious. Any young man who knew his place would not go to such a place to be an official. Wasn't that courting death? The Lu family was not considered the top family in Dongqing, but not everyone could look down on them. They should have connections in the bureaucracy. Lu Shi's answer was beyond Jiang Pingji's expectation. "I was willing to go to the edge of death to survive." Willing? He was willing to die? Or could it be that Lu Shi was certain that he would survive in Hu County? No, he was willing to go to the edge of death to survive? Was there really someone who wanted to kill Lu Shi? To others, Hu County is a place where death is certain. But to me, it is a blessed land that contains a sliver of hope. Lu Shi sighed with emotion. In his mind, he was dressed in sackcloth. He was grief-stricken as he hurried on his way with Amin's memorial tablet. At that time he had lost his son twice. Then his beloved wife was seriously ill. He was getting weaker day by day. There were all kinds of murderous intents staring at the small Lu residence. He was the only child left in his arms. He was at a loss. When he was at his most depressed, he even wanted to die. But Amin was right. Lanting was still alive. His enemy was still alive. He could not die yet. He only had a glimmer of hope when he went to Hu County. Chapter 85. Jiang Pingji was suspicious of the inexplicable test. She glanced at Lu Shi's face and then closed her eyes. It seemed like this cheap father of hers was hiding more secrets than she had imagined. But she was not a fool. Lu Shi's actions were not as simple as a test. It was more like he was trying to prove something. "I've studied Hu Commandery in detail as well. If you want to stay alive, it's not difficult." It was her father's place after all. Although the original Lu Lanting did not have much of an impression of her father, she was full of admiration for him. She desperately wanted to know everything about him, so there were many books and information about Hu County in her study. Hu County is a place where bandits are rampant. The gentry officials collude with each other and exploit the people. That's why they hate the officials sent by the court. Because of the special circumstances, Hu County's officials are hereditary. Sons inherit their father's position. It's almost like a country within a country. Jiang Pingji had always been violent. She would not complicate things if she could. It was very simple to stay alive and go to Hu County. Lu Shi's eyes shone. The confusion and hesitation on his face seemed to have dissipated. How is it not difficult? Bring 300 guards and 10 carts of money and grain. Don't rush to take up your post. Go and suppress the bandits first. Jiang Pingji said with a smile. Her eyes reflected the candlelight and shone brightly. One could not help but indulge in her confidence. The people of Hu County are tough. How can they be convinced by a letter from the imperial court? Only a strong army and force can intimidate the people. Only then can they not act rashly. Powerful soldiers have always been forged in blood. First, we will use the small group of bandits to test the waters. If they sincerely pledge allegiance to us, we can recruit them. If they resist, we will kill them without mercy. If necessary, we will kill them all. This is the name of a fierce army. They were bandits. No matter how ruthless they were, no one would be able to find fault with them. This seemingly nonsensical move was actually for the sake of secretly recruiting strong and useful people to expand his own strength. The second branch of the Lu family had a large business and plenty of money and food. It was enough for Lu Shi to play like this for a year or two. The squires and officials who tried to sharpen their knives, collude with the roving bandits, and assassinate him were all so scared that they did not dare to make a sound. They did not even dare to move. However, in order to avoid being suspected by the court, we can order some of the subdued roving bandits to sneak into the forest in disguise and continue to be his roving bandits. They can secretly pay attention to the movements of all parties, and they can also monitor the movements of the squires and officials. In short, the entire Hu County should be gradually devoured. Jiang Pingji's thoughts had not been thought through. It was just her first reaction. After fighting for so many years, it had become an instinct. They prioritized using force to solve problems. Hu Commandery was a tough nut to crack. If they weren't ruthless, they wouldn't be able to subdue them. Although the second branch of the Lu family was rich, they could not fully support the military. Therefore, it was a good way to save money by feeding on the enemy. Lu Shi's eyes grew brighter as Jiang Pingji spoke slowly. She pretended not to see it and lowered her eyes. Hu Commandery is so poor because of two reasons: man-made disasters and natural disasters. Man-made disasters can be solved, but natural disasters are not. Lu Shi seemed to have let go of something. He smiled and asked, "But Lanting, you seem to have a plan." "I have observed that one of the reasons why Hu Commandery is so poor is because of the drought. Most of the fields are dry and crops cannot grow." Jiang Pingji gestured to Hu Commandery on the great universal geographical map. However, Hu Commandery is a land of flowing water. Jiang Pingji had carefully read through the information Lu Lanting had collected. The girl seemed to be obsessed with becoming a man like her father. But the problem of Hu Commandery was right in front of her, and she could not figure it out. She did not know where to start. It was not a difficult problem for Jiang Pingji. As a genetic warrior, she had to adapt to different environments. She had to learn everything related to combat. Who knew she might be able to survive one day? She had even been trained to survive in the wilderness. She had been thrown into the abyss of death unarmed. There were 1,000 people who had participated in the training, but she was the only one who had survived. It was not a suitable place for humans to live. Humans needed food, air, and water. Apart from the general knowledge she had learned from books, the rest of her knowledge was accumulated through life and death struggles. Combined with the culture and customs of Hu Commandery, there were many descriptions of mountains and veins. She found some clues. Of course, underground water cannot alleviate the drought in Hu Commandery. Jiang Pingji's finger moved to a large river near Hu Commandery. It was known as the Mother River of Dongqing, but the river's embankment had collapsed all year round. Hu Commandery lacked water, but some places had so much water that people could drown. It was hard to say which was more fatal, flood or drought. It was a choice between dying of thirst or drowning. No matter which one was chosen, they would die. It was just that the method of death was different. The people born in Dongqing were unlucky. They did not have a single moment of peace in the whole year. First, dig underground water. After the disaster is alleviated, gather the people and use manpower to divert the water from the branch into the river in Hu Commandery. The main river could not be moved easily. If there was another flood and the river erupted, Lu Shi would be the one to blame. But it was not a problem to divert the water from the branch. It could reduce the work and shorten the time. Moreover, the branch was closer to Hu Commandery. Lu Shi smiled and asked, "This plan is feasible, but how can the people bear the burden of corvée labor?" Corvée labor was, to put it bluntly, unpaid manual labor. It was heavy and often resulted in murder cases. Moreover, it was difficult to motivate the people. Jiang Pengji thought about it and said, "What's so difficult about it? Promise the people some compensation and that they will be responsible for 3 meals of coarse grain. Also, promise that when the project is completed and the land is reclaimed, the government will provide farming tools and cattle. Every household will be able to reduce or exempt their taxes." With compensation, how could the people's enthusiasm be the same as free labor? Monetary compensation was the motivation and direction to move forward. Hu Commandery was a strange place. Dongqing had little control over it and all the laws were just lip service. If Lu Shi could settle down in Hu Commandery, it would be easy for him to reduce or even exempt taxes for a few years. It was a good deal to use the court's order to do him a favor. The people's reputation would belong to him. Lu Shi asked, "Such a huge project will require an uncountable amount of money. Where will the money come from? What's more, corvée labor has its own rules. If we really implement it, not only will we have to face the pressure of not having enough money, but we may also be impeached." Chapter 86. Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. She was cunning and said, "The officials love the people like they are their own children. Why can't they pay for it? The law doesn't punish the masses. The imperial court can't save the people, so why can't the people in Hu County save themselves? To put it bluntly, it was robbing the rich to help the poor. Opportunities are created by people. You'll only suffer if you stick to the rules." Her eyes flashed with interest. "Those rural gentry clans that have been entrenched in Hu County for hundreds of years are all filthy rich. How can good people like them be absent when it comes to benefiting the people? Aren't pigs fattened so that they can be slaughtered and eaten during the new year? They could always get something out of slaughtering them. As for how to make those Paishio spit out the money and rice, it's simple. Hu County does suffer from drought every year, but the root cause of the current situation is man-made. The imperial court provides relief money every year and reduces taxes every year, but what's the result? Natural disasters were scary, but the people's hearts were more frightening when they fought among themselves. They could resist natural disasters if they were united, but the man-made disaster was the reason why Hu County went from a chaotic and impoverished Xia dynasty to Dongqing. Let's not talk about this. Just look at the relief money allocated every year from the previous dynasty to Dongqing. It's definitely a huge loophole that can't be filled. Wait, is there still any doubt? If those people don't want to spit out what they ate, we can only resort to extreme measures. Whether it's falsifying accounts or pretending to be bandits, exterminating the family and confiscating the property, there must be a suitable method. The former method could at least save their lives, but the latter would be exterminated. There's nothing in this world that can't be solved with a knife. If there is, I'll do it again." Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes as she spoke. Her lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile, which was indescribably beautiful. It would be best if there was evidence, but if there was no evidence, she could only fabricate it. Extraordinary times called for extraordinary actions. Even a gentleman couldn't rigidly adhere to the rigid rules. If it didn't work, she could publicize it to the people. Lu Shi didn't have to do anything. The seething resentment would drive people to their deaths. To put it bluntly, if he wanted to govern Hu County well, he couldn't rely on being a gentleman. He wanted to be as much of a hooligan as he could be. If they were evil, he needed to be even more evil than them. If they didn't agree with him, they would start fighting and killing. However, to achieve this, the public must have a high reputation, and they must have a military force that the officials and gentry are afraid of. Otherwise, it will be extremely easy to die on the spot. What Jiang Pingji said was built on the foundation of absolute military force. If Lu Shi wanted to heal Hu County, he would inevitably anger the local tyrants and harm their interests. Men die for wealth and birds die for food. It was extremely normal for him to kill Lu Shi for his own benefit. It's not difficult to stay alive. Establishing a firm foothold and governing Hu County complement each other. Jiang Pingji's mouth was dry after saying so much. She secretly licked her dry lips with her tongue. Her eyes were bright and spirited. What did father do back then? Lu Shi smiled shyly. Just like my son. In other words, he had used the methods that Lu Lanting had used, but he was not as ruthless and decisive as she was. The methods he had used against the local gentry in Hu County seemed ruthless, and they had even given him the title of King of Hell behind his back. However, compared to Lu Lanting, his methods were tame and kind. No matter how ruthless Lu Shi was, he had at least let the gentry survive. Lu Lanting, on the other hand, had surrounded the residence of the gentry. She had killed every living thing in the residence. Not even a bird or a chicken was spared. Almost all the gentry in Hu County, except for those who had defected early on, had been killed by her. Lu Shi looked at Jiang Pingji with a complicated expression. Even though she did not look murderous and her eyes were clear, he was sure that she was not joking. Thinking of this, Lu Shi muttered, "But Lanting, you've forgotten something very important." Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. Her plan had been improvised, so it was normal for it to have loopholes. She had always been conceited, so when she heard that Lu Shi's plan would not work, she became interested. "Father, please advise me." Lu Shi did not speak. He wrote 2 words on the table with his index finger. Jiang Pingji's face darkened. He said, "Your plan is feasible, but have you ever thought that you will offend all the gentry clans by doing this? In today's era, insulting the emperor in public was worse than insulting the aristocratic families. The gentry clans were powerful. Jiang Pingji's plan could solve the problem in Hu County, but what should he do next? Put himself in a hostile position with all the gentry clans? What's more, most of the talented people nowadays come from the aristocratic families." Lu Shi stopped here and changed the topic. "It's rare to see a few people from poor families. If we do as you say, have you ever thought about the consequences of being ostracized by them? In today's era, most of the resources were given to the gentry clans. They had a lot of money and knowledge, and the ratio of talents they nurtured was much higher than that of ordinary people. Innate talent was important, but so was the environment and education. If she offended all the gentry clans according to her plan, who would be willing to work for her if she rebelled in the future?" Jiang Pingji's face darkened. She raised her head and looked at Lu Shi. There seemed to be an undercurrent in her dark eyes. "So what do you think we should do, father?" Jiang Pingji asked deliberately. Lu Shi said bluntly, "We can't offend them completely. They could be offended, but they could not become irreconcilable enemies. It was important to leave some leeway for others." Jiang Pingji pursed her lips and thought for a while. In the end, she said, "It is better to get rid of future troubles than to keep them around. There was nothing that could not be solved with a knife. If there was, then another knife. It was the same no matter who came." Lu Shi looked at Jiang Pingji with a complicated expression. After a long time, he let out a long sigh and said, "Lanting, I don't care what you're thinking or what you're going to do, but you must think twice before you act. Think about yourself and your family." After all, she was the second legitimate son of the Lu family in Hejian. With his reminder, Jiang Pingji reacted and responded, "I understand." Lu Shi did not dare to think about whether or not Jiang Pingji had really listened to him. Chapter 87. Forget it. Let's not talk about such a depressing matter. Lu Shi cut the conversation short. He did not want the father and son to get into an argument over something that did not even exist. Not to mention anything else, but his daughter's answer just now made him extremely satisfied and even proud. Emperor Qin of the Jiang dynasty was not to be underestimated. Lu Shi's expression did not change, but he had been thinking about it. Jiang Pingji secretly frowned and said, "Father is at home now. You should rest well. It's better not to worry too much." "If that's the case, I'll listen to you." Lu Shi smiled and shook his head. "I suddenly feel like eating egg custard." Jiang Pingji said coldly, "I'm not good at cooking." In fact, Lu Lanting's current body did not even know where the kitchen was. Jiang Pingji was used to eating all kinds of nutrient solutions. She did not mind stuffing them into her mouth as long as she could eat them. Survival was the most important thing. As for the only thing that was related to cooking, it was barbecue. "In that case, I'll cook for Lanting. Let's have a good drink together." Their relationship was strong. The topic was a little sensitive and the atmosphere was tense. They needed to ease up. Lu Shi was not the only one who thought so. Jiang Pingji agreed. It was just that, drinking wine while drinking egg custard, that was really too much. Besides, Lu Lanting's body was still that of an underage girl. Was it really okay to drink? It turned out that she was thinking too much. Lu Shi said he was going to cook, but he only knew how to make egg custard because the steps were simple. As for drinking, he only knew how to make pear blossom wine. The alcohol content was so low that Jiang Pingji could drink more than 10 jars without getting drunk. After only a few cups, Lu Shi's cheeks were already tinged with a slightly tipsy red. She looked down at the wine cup and then at Lu Shi. How could he get drunk? She didn't know that because Gu Min believed that alcohol could damage the liver, Lu Shi had isolated himself from alcohol and tobacco since he was a child. Before he turned 20, he would only drink wine on his wedding night. Later on, when he socialized with officials, he would drink tea instead. Now that Gu Min was gone, he would occasionally drink a few cups. A person's tolerance for alcohol depended on both talent and training. Lu Shi didn't have the talent, nor did he train. His body wasn't in good shape, and he was exhausted by the affairs of Hu County a few years ago. Even a few cups of low-alcohol pear blossom wine would make him slightly tipsy. As the saying went, it wasn't the wine that intoxicated him, but the wine that intoxicated him. Lu Shi deliberately wanted to get drunk and no one could stop him. After drinking a few more cups, he was already a little dizzy. His eyes were a little red from being drunk and his eyes were a little red. He and Jiang Pingji sat on the veranda in the courtyard. Your mother loved the pear trees in the courtyard. She often took care of them. The pear wine of the Lu residence became a must-have for guests. Once upon a time there was a swing under this tree. Your eldest brother was once in her arms, sitting on the swing and laughing happily. Even though the meaning of the pear tree was not good, Gu Min liked it. Lu Shi took advantage of the fact that he was slightly tipsy and supported his forehead with his hand. Hot tears rolled down his cheeks. He passed away when he was only 2 years old. Your mother's body was weak and I didn't want her to have multiple pregnancies, lest it hurt her body and her mind. After that, I raised her for 4 years before I had you and your second brother. Who knew that he would drown in a pond when he was 4 years old? Ever since you were born, your mother did everything herself. She taught you not to talk to strangers, not to go to the water and even to avoid the rocks. She was so careful but she still fell into her trap. Lu Shi's eyes were filled with hatred and murderous intent as he spoke of the past. Lanting, this woman in the backyard looks charming, but she's even more venomous than a snake or scorpion. Her ruthlessness is breathtaking. Jiang Pingji sipped her wine as she analyzed all the information she had gathered so far. Both of Lu Lanting's brothers were killed by the woman in the backyard. Lu Shi knew who the woman was, but he couldn't take revenge on her. He was even restrained by her, so he had to be careful. What was the motive for harming people? Could it be that she liked Lu Shi and killed his child out of jealousy? Jiang Pingji secretly glanced at Lu Shi. He was handsome and even middle-aged he still looked elegant. He was even more mature and charming than the hairless kids. If it was a crime of passion, wouldn't it have been better to kill Gu Min? Gu Min, on the other hand, died of illness due to exhaustion. Lu Shi was slightly drunk. He squinted his eyes and looked very drunk. How can my daughter be like those mediocre women, practicing in a man's backyard? Jiang Pingji listened quietly. She didn't want to argue with a drunkard. She should be practicing with those men. Jiang Pingji almost choked on her wine and spat it out. Cheap father, have you forgotten your gender? Encouraging their daughter to kill her male compatriots like this, was there still any love for her compatriots? Feng Huayu is beautiful, but he is old-fashioned and vicious. He has beautiful wives and concubines at home, but he is not a good match. Jiang Pingji squinted at him. According to her observation, Feng Jin was just a chick. He had never taken a girl for a plunger. How could he have beautiful wives and concubines? Su Xiaoyu is beautiful, but he is rebellious and not easy to tame. He is an ingrate and not a good match. Jiang Pingji didn't understand. What did their character have to do with beauty? Shouldn't he reflect on himself when he's so obsessed with looks? She waited for Lu Shi to continue his drunken rampage, but he paused and turned his head to stare at Jiang Pingji. His eyes seemed to be shining. His movement was very sudden. If she was a timid person, she might have burst into tears and been scared out of her wits. Lu Shi was tipsy. Lanting, what do you think of Qing Yumo from Langya? Although he is a few years older than you, he is gentle and cautious. Who is Qing Yumo? She was a little suspicious, but according to the characteristics of Feng Jin and Suku, Qing Yumo was probably young and handsome. Not interested. Never heard of him. Then, what about Han Wenbin from Langya? She is young and beautiful, and her heart is exquisite. She carries herself with awe-inspiring righteousness. Is this cheap father trying to be a pimp? Thinking about what Lu Shi had said, Jiang Pingji couldn't help but sympathize with the youths who were targeted by him. Lu Shi sighed and said regretfully, why doesn't Lanting like it? Probably because they are not beautiful enough. Although she hadn't seen them before, they were all men. Their looks were definitely not good enough for her. She was obsessed with looks. It seemed that Lu Shi was also obsessed with looks, but she was more picky about it. The pupil had surpassed the master. Beautiful? Lu Shi tilted his head and thought for a long time. Many names floated in his muddled brain. Ever since he had his daughter, he had been thinking about marrying into the family. His daughter could not get married anyway. Not even a chance. No windows. Chapter 88. If he couldn't marry into her family, it would be better to follow his previous plan of marrying a wife and concubines, but secretly marrying a man to carry on the family line. The future Emperor Qin of the Jiang dynasty should be so willful and domineering. Even if she had 3 husbands and 4 attendants, others had to shut up. It was like a mother beating her son. There was no reason at all. No matter what, she couldn't let those jackals, wolves, tigers and leopards take advantage of her. Therefore, Lu Shi continued to recommend her with all his might, trying to get her to accept his recommendation. Beautiful? I have a candidate. How about Langya's Wei Zixiao? He was born with a romantic charm and looks like a beautiful woman. He is the immortal Gu Shi. Lu Shi raised his eyebrows at Jiang Pingji. His action seemed frivolous and meaningful, as if all men knew. If it had been someone else who made that gesture and gaze, a perverted expression would have appeared on their faces. However, it was Lu Shi. It had to be said that this was a world where looks mattered the most. When he made that gesture, it had a sense of elegance that made people's hearts sway. Jiang Pingji was embarrassed. She smiled and said, "Why are they all from Langya?" It made all the men in the world, except for those from Langya, look like they were dead. It seemed that her father was really drunk. It is said that Hejian County attracts all the beauties in the world, and Longhuan gathers the literary talents of the human world. Most of the noble ladies in Hejian County are from noble families. They are famous for their beauty and are praised in history books. Langya and Ganning County are full of wise counselors and ministers. They are the places where literary talents gather. Dongqing is the weakest of the 5 countries, but the other 4 countries see it as a thorn in their side. Isn't it because the 3 counties have many talented people? Lu Shi clapped his hands and laughed. Only those outstanding men are worthy of my son's beauty. Didn't Amin say that 2 smart and outstanding people will give birth to even more outstanding offspring? Jiang Pingji smiled and did not say anything. She poured wine and sipped on it. Not long after, Lu Shi, who was sitting on the other side of the table, breathed smoothly and fell asleep. The pear blossoms in the courtyard fell with the night wind, and some nautily fell into his hair. Sigh, I'm already drunk. Jiang Pingji finished the remaining jars of pear blossom wine and looked at the sky. She got up and gently carried Lu Shi, whose cheeks were red from sleep. Although he was an adult man, his weight was unimaginably light. It was as if his entire body was so thin that only a few bones remained. Lu Shi placed them on the mattress, then covered them with the blanket and tucked in the corners of the blanket. Under the candlelight, the shadows in Lu Shi's eyes were even more pronounced. They are indeed skinny beyond recognition. But what happened back then that caused the Lu residents to become like this? Jiang Pingji was hesitant. She frowned slightly and recalled the hard touch. It seemed that he was so skinny that only bones were left. As he stood up, his gaze fell on a corner of the room. Is that Gu Min's memorial tablet? She paused for a moment and then left Lu Shi's room. She closed the door and made sure that the night wind couldn't get in. She pulled the heavy cloak around her body and chose the shortest path to her courtyard. It was right across the inner garden of the Lu residence. There were lanterns hanging in the corridor. Although the illumination wasn't high, it wasn't enough to cause a fall. She even met a group of guards who were patrolling the night. There were 5 guards in a group. When they saw Jiang Pingji, they all stopped and saluted. Okay. She responded and then returned to her courtyard without looking back. This Lu residence isn't small, but it's hiding a lot of secrets. The water is deep. The corner of Jiang Pingji's lips curled up. In the darkness, there seemed to be a glimmer of light in her dark eyes. The next day, Lu Shi held his swollen and groggy head and lifted the blankets on his body. He sighed in his heart that his body was becoming more and more useless. A few glasses of pear blossom wine could make him faint. He couldn't remember how he had returned to his bedroom from the corridor the night before. He had just gotten up when the maid outside the room, who had heard the noise, asked gently, "Master, are you awake?" "Yes, I'm awake." Lu Shi lay back down and waited for his swollen head to get used to it before he sat up straight. He tidied up his appearance and made sure there was nothing wrong with him before he called for the maid who had been waiting outside the room. He had been married to Gu Min for a few years. It wasn't a long time, but they had been childhood sweethearts. Many of his habits had been influenced by her words and actions since he was a child. For example, for some of the more intimate and physical tasks, he would usually do it himself if he could. The maid entered the room in a line. Lu Shi took the handkerchief with a cold expression and washed his face with warm water. His muddled mind was completely sober. He didn't drink much. After another night, the smell of alcohol on him was almost non-existent. He put on his specially fumigated clothes, and the fragrance lingered around him. Unless it was Jiang Pingji with a sharp nose, no one would be able to tell if he had alcohol on his clothes. Dressed neatly, Lu Shi looked at the sky outside and silently estimated the time. Did Lanting come this morning? He had slept until the afternoon. No wonder his head hurt so much when he woke up. Drinking too much water would make one tired. Second Lang Jun came to pay his respects this morning, but he didn't let us disturb you when he saw you were sleeping soundly. Lu Shi was silent. Some scenes flashed through his mind. His face turned pale and he held back the urge to touch his forehead. His image as a noble father. Wasn't it all gone now? The maid lowered her head. She didn't dare to look above Lu Shi's chest. She kept a safe distance from him, so she didn't see Lu Shi's conflicted expression. He looked like he was smiling but he wasn't. He looked like he was crying but he wasn't. In other families, this kind of personal maid who served the master of the house would most likely be taken in when the mistress was unwell. Even if she didn't have a proper title, her status would definitely be different from that of an ordinary maid. It could be said that she had flown up the branches and turned into a phoenix. But this rule didn't apply to the Lu family. At least it didn't work on Lu Shi. The elders in the house all knew that. You can leave. I need some time alone. He really needed some time alone. Being carried by his young daughter like a princess, he felt that his image as a father had collapsed. When the maid left and the door was closed, Lu Shi mumbled to himself in front of his wife's memorial tablet. Is this the Qi attack that you mentioned, Amin? Outside the house, a few maids quietly left. One of them was beautiful and lively. She had been bought into the Lu family for less than half a year, but she was already full of vitality. Sister Tong, the master has been back for a few days. Why hasn't he gone to the backyard? The maidservant who was addressed as Sister Tong was an elder in the Lu residence. She was also a first-class maidservant who served Lu Shi. She was only in her early 20s but she always wore a straight face. She wore no makeup and she looked gloomy to everyone. The color of her clothes was also dark and gloomy. Chapter 89. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Master, you're just a maid. You have no right to comment on the affairs of the inner courtyard. Tong Sanyang's face was taut as she coldly sized up the little girl from head to toe, clearly seeing through the little girl's delusions. The maid's face turned pale, but she didn't dare to talk back to Tong Sanyang. Before Lu Shi came back, she had been in charge of all the affairs of the main courtyard. She wasn't a steward, but she was more like a steward. Even the old steward liked Tong Sanyang, saying that she was efficient and capable. The maid whispered timidly, I'm just worried. I heard that the place where Master came from is a barren land. Caring for Master? That's Madam's business. What does it have to do with you? Tong Sanyang was just short of direct sarcasm. Her eyes were filled with impatience and disdain. She had thought that the maid was a lively and lovely girl, but she was also an idiot with a big heart. The maid was about to defend herself when Tong Sanyang said bluntly, I know what you're thinking. Everyone has their own ambitions. You have your own legs. If you want to climb into the master's bed, who can stop you? I'm just giving you a piece of advice. If you don't want to die, give up. With that, Tong Sanyang snorted coldly and left with light steps. She was fast but not disorderly. Another idiot. Why didn't she use her brain to think about why all the maids in the mansion, regardless of their age except for the few in the second Longjuan's courtyard, all wore plain makeup and didn't even dare to wear a hairpin? Why were their clothes made of good material but not bright colors? Did she really think that the Lu family was like other rich men who would lose their minds after being teased by a woman? As she thought about it, Tong Sanyang couldn't help but recall a scene from many years ago. Even after so many years, those memories hadn't faded. She remembered the scene where the second Lang Jun had ordered his servants to be beaten to death. It was a different scene with a different protagonist, but it was all the same bloody scene. When the late madam passed away, Master followed the rules of etiquette. After the deadline, the old lady secretly sent a few girls who looked similar to the late madam, hoping that they could ease the grief in Master's heart and persuade him to remarry as soon as possible. And the result? Among them, the one who resembled the late wife was willing to throw away her pride. She took off all her clothes and wrapped herself in a thin quilt to seduce him. She even reached out to Second Langjun, which caused Second Langjun, who was already weak, to fall ill and almost die. What happened to the maid in the end? Didn't the old master order people to cut off his entire face and beat him to death? Everyone said that the second son of the Lu family, Lu Shi, was gentle and affectionate, as if he would never get angry. But who knew how ruthless this man could be when he decided to be? He hated the fact that the woman had seduced him with a face that resembled his late wife's. He hated the fact that she had used such a despicable method to murder his second Langjun. After the incident, he ordered his men to cut off her face and remove the thin quilt that had been covering her body. He wanted her to be beaten to death naked in the main courtyard. At the time, Tong Sanyong was still young, but she had witnessed that scene with all the maids in the estate. It had become a nightmare to this day. Fortunately, the old madam had arrived in time and was skillful enough to prevent Lu Shi's reputation from being cruel and heartless. After that incident, no one in the entire Lu family had the guts to seduce Lu Shi. Every single one of them wished that they could not wear any makeup. They chose the most mature clothes, and they could not look at the head of the house with their eyes above their necks. All those pretentious actions and expressions of wanting to say something had to be put away. After all, no one would complain about living too long. Tong Sanyong's face was cold and hard. Her eyes seemed to be dripping with ice. Tong Sanyong had left in a hurry, so she did not realize that their conversation had fallen into the ears of a third person. That person was none other than Jiang Pingji. She was sitting on a fake mountain, dressed in a comfortable brown dress. She swung her legs and looked in that direction with a faint smile on her face. She had originally wanted to find a quiet place to meditate and try to pick up where she had left off. Perhaps it was because of the rich experience from her previous life, but Jiang Pingji meditated for the first time in her life. She quickly got on the right track. A wisp of ethereal mental strength surrounded her body and greatly enhanced her five senses. She entered a mysterious state of spiritual emptiness. Although the previous fusion of martial strength was a bit of a cheat, the benefits were not limited to a little increase in martial strength. Not only did her martial strength recover a little, but her mental strength also recovered a lot. She had barely reached the baseline of mental training. The scientific name for mental training was meditation and meditation. It was a training method that the Federation had developed after they entered the interstellar era. When one's mental strength reached a certain level, it could trigger a qualitative change in the body's genes and further strengthen the body. Jiang Pingji did not expect to hear the conversation between Tong Sanyong and the little servant girl. The content of the conversation made her not know whether to laugh or cry. Lu Shi was indeed very young in her era, but in this era he was old enough to be a grandfather. Yes, if Lu Lanting's eldest brother had not died young, he would have been old enough to find a wife and have children. In other words, Lu Shi was already half a step into the grandfather's generation. Jiang Pingji watched Tong Sanyong's silhouette as she left. She saw the angry expression on the little servant girl's face. Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a faint smile. No matter the era, power is the most attractive thing a man has. Jumping off the fake mountain, Jiang Pingji went straight to her courtyard. She was greeted by Taksha's indignant face. "Langjun, why did you go out in this outfit?" Taksha was holding a pine-green leather cloak in her arms. It was embroidered with delicate cloud patterns and pine leaves. Seeing that the missing Jiang Pingji had returned, she quickly went forward to put it on her. "This is not what you should wear." Jiang Pingji did not mind. "Clothes are made for people to wear. Why should I wear them?" Taksha did not raise her head. "This is not suitable for Langjun." Jiang Pingji did not refute. Instead, she obediently put on the clothes that Taksha handed to her. Even though the clothes covered her tightly and the cloak on the outside was spacious and the sleeves fluttered when the wind blew, it still could not hide the fact that there was wind underneath. Once again she began to miss the second ruler in her previous life. Why couldn't Taksha prepare clothes for her that were not open? Her mother, a time traveler, had been in this world for so many years. Couldn't she lead the fashion and recommend clothes for others? Jiang Pingji remained expressionless. She changed into the clothes that Taksha thought suited her status. The wide sleeves made it easy for her to go for a walk. After confirming that there were no problems, she let the system open the streaming room. In less than 2 seconds the screen was filled with bullet screens that blinded her. "Zhuangshi Weiguan, damn, I finally made it in. It's so hard to get a seat in this streaming room." Changxiang Dong Dong, same to the previous post. It took me more than 2 hours to get a seat and see the legendary streamer. Chapter 90. Fatty Big C, bro, it's good enough to get it. Can you imagine 8 people in a dorm watching the stream together? Paydaxing. Speaking of which, the host's streaming room is too strange. There's a limit of 3,000 people. There are too many monks and not enough porridge. I wonder if there are some rich people lurking around and giving the host a few 9-5 supremes to increase the limit. Hit me if you don't agree, it's useless. The host's streaming room is very strange. It's different from the rules of streaming apps. Jiang Pingji looked at the complaints and discussions on the screen. She raised her eyebrows and sent a bullet screen. Host V, don't worry everyone. The live streaming room limit has been put on the agenda. She posted the content of the semi-interactive and fully interactive streaming modes. Host V, I'm now collecting the content of the fully interactive streaming mode. You can tag whatever you want to see and I'll select the content to vote for. As for the content of the semi-interactive streaming mode, I'll open it when there's a suitable opportunity. As there was a new group of viewers in the streaming room, Jiang Pingji simply explained in detail what happened in the streaming room. Fatty Big C, I want to see the host go to a brothel. I heard there are many high-quality girls in this room. Maybe it was because of the culture of modern society, many people were more sensitive to these special industries and were more curious about them. Fatty Big C started the discussion, and the screen was filled with comments about visiting a brothel and looking at girls. Paydaxing, that's not right. I heard the host is a girl. Are you guys crazy to let a girl go to a brothel in ancient times? There are all sorts of people there. If the host gets bullied, will you take responsibility? What a bunch of troublemakers. There were some who wanted to cause trouble and there were also some righteous young men. Apart from Paydaxing, there was also a small group of viewers who supported him. After all, women in ancient times were very particular about their reputation. If an unmarried girl went to a brothel, even if nothing happened, her reputation would be ruined. Jiang Pingji quietly watched the fun and didn't get involved. However, she also wanted to go. After all, there were many beautiful girls. But Lu Shi's father probably wouldn't want to see his daughter go to a brothel. She silently looked at the bullet screen for a while, then turned her head and said to Takshu with her usual expression, "Go get Suku here." Xuanmei's eyes lit up when she heard Suku's name. She looked at Jiang Pingji with yearning. Takshu was initially reluctant. She did not have a good impression of Suku. However, when she saw Sun Mei's reaction, she frowned and immediately accepted the task. The place where Suku lived was not far from Jiang Pingji's courtyard. Takshu was efficient. She quickly brought him over. "Let's go," Jiang Pingji said to Suku. It was the first official training for the servants. She felt that it would be better for her to be there to hold the fort. Suku's small stature was not threatening at all. It was different from the day before. Other than Jiang Pingji's horse carriage, there were 2 bullock carts with heavy loads following behind. Seeing this, Suku could not help but ask suspiciously, "Langjun, what are you doing?" Jiang Pingji gave a simple explanation. "Since we're going to train, we can't lack the necessary items. These are prepared for their training. I also asked the sewing room to make a lot of sandbags, but the cloth is rough and normal sand will seep out easily, so I chose dry clay." Suku tilted his head and thought about the pattern Jiang Pingji had drawn. He thought about the large amount of wood she had bought the day before. "The wood you bought yesterday was also for the training?" Jiang Pingji did not hide it. "Yes. It's just that those items are more delicate. The carpenter said it would take 10 days to half a month to produce the finished products. It's still a problem if they can't be used. If they can't be used, we need to find more suitable wood or substitutes." Suku recalled the strange pattern he had seen. He was a little confused. "I heard that the Lu's woodworking workshop is one of the best in Hejian County. The craftsmen there are also skilled and experienced. I wonder what it is that even they have to spend so much effort on?" Jiang Pingji tilted her head and looked at him. She said strangely, "Have you ever seen a servant patrolling the courtyard empty-handed? Since the carpenters were rushing to make them, they were naturally weapons that were more convenient to use." Suku's face changed. "Privately made weapons? Of course not. It's just a crossbow that I improved. Can be used for hunting. Your previous words have reminded me that not everyone has the strength to draw a heavy bow. Even a strong man, if he doesn't eat his fill for a long time, he won't even be able to stand properly, let alone shoot an arrow. Not everyone has the ability to shoot from 100 steps away. If you want to achieve this, you need to train hard for a long time. The efficiency is too low." She did not elaborate, but Suku understood the hidden meaning in her words. Was his Langjun hinting that the crossbow she had asked the craftsman to rush to make could easily shoot a crossbow for those who lacked strength and eyesight? If there really is such a weapon, Lang Jun should choose the craftsman well in case the secret is leaked. Su Ke looked calm but his heart was in turmoil. Was there really such a magical thing in the world? Jiang Pingji nodded her head. In this era of cold weapons, the emergence of any advanced weapon could achieve the unexpected effect of changing the outcome of a war. Although she did not care about these things, she could not let others take advantage of them. I'm not a naive person. For such an important thing, I will naturally find a reliable person. Most people would be naked in front of her when they were completely unprepared. She knew whether or not they could be used. Naive? What does that mean? Su Ke nodded at first, but then he was confused. Jiang Pingji explained with a straight face, silly and naive means unreliable. Many viewers in the streaming room felt sorry for Jiang Pingji as she bullied Su Ke. Menzugu, #laughter cry. Streamer, it's not nice of you. Don't bully the cute baby. Su Ke was very similar to a certain young male idol in their era. That young male idol's fans called him cute baby. Oxianfeng Mian, #goodbye. I've lived for a long time, but this is the first time I know that naive means unreliable. Qingshan Weishua Bai Tu, someone help. The streamer's language teacher's coffin is about to collapse. Jiang Pingji secretly shrugged. She had learned the word naive from the bullet screen of the streaming audience. How could she be blamed if she misunderstood it? Su Ke listened to the explanation and said seriously, Lang Jun is not naive. Chapter 91. These people can be the first group leaders. If they don't make the cut, we'll eliminate them in the next selection test. Su Ke took the list, glanced at it and remembered it. Lang Jun, are you really going to lead them to kill the bandits after the training? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and her eyes were sharp. Of course. Do you think I'm joking? Su Ke shook his head. He had seen Jiang Pingji's methods, so he didn't think she was the kind of person who would joke. I don't mean that. It's just that most of the bandits around Hejin County are hiding in the deep mountains and it's hard to find them. If we get entangled with them, I'm afraid we'll be at a disadvantage. Although he didn't say it directly, Su Ke wasn't optimistic about it. Let's not talk about that. Those bandits are all desperados. They have nothing to worry about, so they're naturally cruel and bloodthirsty. But those servants don't have the heart to die. It was said that the unreasonable were afraid of the reckless. A group of servants who had no experience in killing had little chance of winning against the bloodthirsty bandits. There's always a first time for everything. What's so scary about killing? Jiang Pingji glanced at Su Ke. Although he was young and skinny, he had chopped people to death with a hatchet. Since she said so, it was obvious how determined she was. Su Ke wouldn't ask for a rebuff and continued to persuade her. The training process and specific programs were written in detail in the booklet. They were all basic physical training, so it wasn't difficult to do. Su Ke gathered everyone together. First, he picked out a few corporals, and then he divided the rest of the servants into groups. The whole process was quiet. The group of people were as obedient as little chicks, waiting for their mother hen to assign tasks. Surprisingly, no one dared to make a sound and cause trouble. What a joke. Did they dare to make a sound? Yesterday, the fiend who single-handedly defeated more than 10 of them was staring at them from the side. Who would want to live too long? Thinking about the scene from the day before, the places where Jiang Pingji beat them still hurt. Because the training environment was too simple, the training programs were naturally not fancy, so basic physical training programs were very common. Oshui Yin Feng Mian, it feels like an ancient military training? Patrick Starr. This is much more difficult than military training. When I was in school, military training was either running or walking in a square formation. It was actually quite easy. As for these people, after a period of training, they would be sent to suppress bandits. If they were not careful, they would lose their lives. Fatty Big C. I just finished military training a month ago. It's much easier than them. Full mouth of dog food. But is this training useful? Why did it feel so unreliable? Tudu Feichio. It can't be like that. How can the host be so unreliable? How could Jiang Pingji not have considered these things that even the live stream viewers knew? Pure physical training could only make these servants stronger and stronger, but it was not enough to fight the bandits to the death with just this. After all, they were the embryonic form of an orderly troop, not a pile of loose sand that fought on their own. They didn't need powerful individual combat abilities, but they needed to learn how to cooperate in small groups. Running 10,000 meters 3 times a day doesn't mean that you can finish it with all your might. This method is the dumbest. You will run out of energy one by one, and when you reach the finish line, you will be too tired to get up. Let's say you are a speedy troop that received orders to support a battlefield. If you follow this method, even if you arrive in time, you will be a tired troop with no combat ability. Jiang Pingji watched these people run around several ridges for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. Even though they were panting from exhaustion and their legs felt like they were filled with lead, none of them completed the task. She frowned under the sun, and Suku was afraid that she would be angry. Although he knew that Jiang Pingji's words made sense, Suku felt that her standards were too high. He tried to persuade her, "Langjun, don't be angry. After all, these people are training for the first time. They will not be used to it. If we give them some time, I think, Xiaoyu, this has nothing to do with whether they are used to it or not. I know what you want to say. They are all bought by the broker house, so their physical condition is not as good as those strong men who have been farming for a long time. Because they don't eat much rice, their strength is not as good as others, so it is reasonable that they can't finish the prescribed distance. But I want to say that this is not correct because they don't know how to run. It would be strange if they could last 10,000 meters if they sped up from the beginning." Jiang Pingji tried to explain in words that everyone could understand. Long-distance running not only tests physical strength and endurance, but also other things. Blindly running will only waste the body's energy. The best situation is to maintain a uniform speed and use it reasonably. Not only that, but they also have to learn how to maintain a reasonable breathing rhythm while running. That kind of rapid breathing will make people more tired. And the range of running, like that person who wanted to swing his arm to the sky, is ridiculously wrong. More importantly, the running posture was too eye-catching. This was the most basic physical training. There would be all kinds of weight-bearing events in the future, and it would be even more tiring. Looking at these guys, there was only one word in Jiang Pingji's mind: chicken. Thinking back, even when she was selected to be trained in a low-level military school when she was still a turnip, the training intensity was more than 10 times higher than these people. She steadily withstood it. These men were all like soft-footed shrimps. They couldn't even compete with her when she was 5 or 6 years old. Chicken. If you don't train well now, you will have no bones left in the future. Jiang Pingji sneered and concluded. Su Ku, who was beside her, was as silent as a chicken, and he did not try to persuade her. He understood that Jiang Pingji did not use the standard of a normal servant to ask these people, but the standard of a tiger, wolf, and bear soldier. As the saying goes, speed is the most important thing in war. For an army, they could easily travel hundreds of miles in a day. It was okay to rush to help or to launch a surprise attack. If they were in such a state, they would not be able to arrive in time even if they risked their lives. When the time came, the people and horses would be exhausted, and they would be ambushed by the enemy who was waiting for them. Of course, this once again proved how ambitious his Langjun was. She really wanted to cause trouble. One by one, get up. Lying on the ground and panting like dogs. Don't you think it's ugly? Jiang Pingji looked at them disdainfully and chased them up from the ground like she was chasing ducks. Her movements were not gentle at all. Looking at these people getting up in 2s and 3s, although their faces were ugly, they were not at their limit. She was slightly satisfied. When they are done with their training, I will buy some younger ones. The old will guide the new. That way your task will be lighter. Chapter 92. Novel Network to provide you with exciting novel reading. Since it was just the beginning, the training was very basic. There was physical training in the morning and a 10,000-meter run 3 times a day. In the afternoon, they practiced the spear made from a wooden stick. They practiced the basic movements of blocking, holding, stabbing, wrapping, circling, pouncing, pointing, and pushing. She knew about the spear because she had been to the Museum of Ancient Times in her previous life. The history of the evolution of weapons in the military school also briefly described the evolution and development of weapons in the ancient times, modern times, ancient times, and modern times. Su Ku held the spear that the carpentry workshop had rushed to make. He weighed it in his hand and suddenly thrust it forward. It looked quite imposing. I couldn't tell. You look as weak as a chicken, but when you play with a spear you have quite a bit of power. Su Ku was speechless. Chicken? Aha, so that's how Langjun sees him? Tao Wu put away the spear. Su Ku looked like he had nothing left to live for. Langjun, I'm sorry. Jiang Pingji smiled without saying a word. She raised her hand and pointed at the other wooden spear. The spear bounced up and jumped into Jiang Pingji's palm. She smiled and said, Do you want to loosen your muscles and bones? Su Ku was stunned. Before he could understand what she meant, a wooden spear came at him. He subconsciously blocked it with the body of the spear, but he found that Jiang Pingji did not use much strength. It looked like she was just fooling around. With this in mind, Su Ku felt a little more confident. If that's the case, Langjun, please come. The audience watching the live stream found that Suku could use the wooden spear so skillfully. His moves were simple and clean, which greatly overturned the impression of a weak scholar they had in their minds. That skill, that posture. How did he look like a weak chicken? In fact, the 6 arts of a gentleman included etiquette, music, archery, imperial carriage, calligraphy, and mathematics. Many scholars could pick up a pen and write poems, ride a horse and play with a spear and shoot arrows, and more or less had some martial arts. Even though most of them were just for show, they looked good but were useless. However, it didn't matter if he was just for show or not. For Jiang Pingji, it didn't make much of a difference. They fought for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. Suku's legs were weak, his eyes were dizzy, his arms were swollen, his palms were bleeding from the rough wooden spear, and his whole body was drenched in sweat. But Jiang Pingji still looked like nothing had happened. Even her breathing was not irregular and her forehead was dry. Young people still need to train. His arms are as soft as noodles. This won't do. She smiled and stabbed the wooden spear into the ground. Like a knife cutting through tofu, half of the spear entered the ground. I'm not talented, but Langjun is brave. Suku cupped his hands and smiled bitterly. He was better at using his brain, and this kind of activity almost made him sprain his waist. As for Jiang Pingji's teasing, he just ignored it and didn't take it to heart. You're still young, so you need to train more. I'm weak and have a lot of problems. I can't stay idle. If you follow me, you really have to train hard. Otherwise, I'm afraid you'll get tired. Jiang Pingji smiled and encouraged him. Literature can bring peace to the world and martial arts can bring peace to the world. Just thinking about it makes my blood boil. Xiaoyu, if you're willing, you can train with these people. She could see that Suku did have some skills. Wouldn't it be a pity to waste them? I was young and ignorant. I was a ranger for a period of time. Later I met my teacher and was enlightened. That's why I became obsessed with the sage's books. Every man had the dream of being a great hero. He would help the weak and rob from the rich to help the poor. Suku was no exception. He had a period of chunibyu, but in the end he put down his sword and picked up his brush to study quietly. He wanted to be a good son who could make his mother feel at ease. It was a pity that his mother died young before she could enjoy her son's filial piety for a few years. Jiang Pingji tilted her head and complained, "Young and ignorant? You make it sound like you're very mature now." Suku was speechless. On the other side, a friend who was watching the live stream gave Suku an emoji. Cafeteria Dafinanti, young Suku Langjun, I'm telling you, you'll lose your baby if you keep this up. Jiang Pingji glanced at it and said to Suku with a smile, "Were you thinking that if I continued to tease you, you'd throw a tantrum?" Suku blushed and said awkwardly, "Langjun, please don't joke around." Jiang Pingji said to him seriously, "Actually, you can throw a tantrum. I can tolerate it. A little temper makes you cuter." In her eyes, Suku was a teenager who threw a tantrum. It was fine for him to be stubborn once in a while. Suku was silent. How should he, as a page boy, deal with his Langjun, who was 5 years younger than him, rudely throwing a tantrum in front of him? "Hurry. I'm waiting online." Reality proved that a rabbit would bite when it was anxious, and Suku would choke when he was anxious. "Langjun, you should save your sweet words for the girls in Langlang Alley." After saying that, Suku cupped his hands and bowed, then flicked his sleeves and left. He could not vent his anger on Jiang Pingji, but it was not a problem for him to torment the servants. The more he understood, the more he felt that the image of the noble son in his mind was crumbling. Of course, it would not take long for him to realize that it was not the noble son who crumbled, but his weird Langjun. Tisk tsk. Speaking of looks, the girls in Langlang Alley may not be as elegant as Xiaoyu. Jiang Pingji lowered her voice to make sure that Suku, who was swinging his sleeves, could hear her. Then Jiang Pingji saw him stumble and miss his footing. He rolled down the ridge of the field. The audience in the streaming room felt sorry for Suku when he couldn't help teasing her. Canteen Dafinanti, streamer, you are so evil. You even bully a cute kid like Suku. I can't bear to see it. She's so adorable, so beautiful, how could you be so cruel to her? I really wanted to rush out of the screen and hug him. Badeo Zhangzi, I've never seen such an evil streamer. Look, you scared him. Cicada too, people in ancient times are very serious. If you do that, he may hate you. Be careful, he might become evil. Xian, haha, I'm looking forward to Suku's evil appearance. Then he will fall in love with the heartless streamer. Jiang Pingji ignored the teasing comments on the screen. She walked to the ridge of the field, squatted down and carried Suku, who was lying on the ground, on her back. Suku was shocked by her actions again. His body was obviously stiff and his muscles were tense. You're so careless even when you're walking. Fortunately, the ridge is low and has been carefully cleaned by the tenant farmers. There aren't any big rocks. Otherwise, you might have broken a leg and disfigured yourself. Jiang Pingji was carrying him on her back, but her steps were light and vigorous. Suku finally recovered from the shock. He did not know where to put his hands and his face was full of embarrassment. Hearing Jiang Pingji's accusation, Suku felt a sense of helplessness. Chapter 93. Am I wrong to say that you're good-looking? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and said matter-of-factly, it's something to be proud of if you're good-looking. It means that your appearance is much better than the average person. Love go, small talk, net cause Suku could neither swallow nor spit it out. His originally pale face turned purple from the suffocation. That wasn't a compliment. She was flirting with him. I'll take you to Lang Lang Alley when I'm free. I don't want you to say that I'm flirting with you. She was always wrong. Suku was speechless. Jiang Pingji continued, but with your looks, I don't know if you're playing with them or if they're playing with you. Suku was speechless. Could she stop talking about Lang Lang Alley? She was going to be traumatized. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie? Then it must be those coquettish bitches playing with Suku. You'll be at a disadvantage if you go there. Even though the viewers in the streaming room were a bit weird, they had a normal aesthetic sense. They all felt that Suku would be at a disadvantage if he went to Lang Lang Alley. Thinking of the innocent young Suku falling into a group of coquettish cheese and being tossed and turned by them, he started to cry pitifully. At that moment, howls and howls could be heard from all directions in the livestream room. Xian, has the streamer decided to go to a brothel? You have to let me know when you're going to stream. Jiang Pingji promised, but she never expected that she would go to Lang Lang Alley under such circumstances. Love go, small talk, netku, I just sprained my ankle. I'll be fine after a few days of rest and some medicine. Jiang Pingji was not a doctor, but she was constantly injured, both internally and externally. After a long period of time, she could be considered a doctor. Moreover, there were compulsory courses in the military school for first aid. Jiang Pingji had learned some, so it was not a problem for her to deal with such minor injuries. Langjun, you know medicine? Suku calmed down a lot, and his impression of Jiang Pingji was renewed. What lofty! What great talent! What wise lord! They were all the result of his blind judgment. She hated herself for being blind at that time. Why did she feel that this Langjun in front of her was a wise ruler? Jiang Pingji lied without blinking. My mother has been bedridden all year round. How can I be at ease? In his spare time he had read some medical books and learned some superficial techniques and superficial knowledge. He couldn't be considered to be an expert in medicine. Speaking of which, I thought of something important. Suku was a very serious young man. Once serious business was brought up, his attention was involuntarily diverted. What is it? I took a look at their training today. These people really know how to endure hardship. They didn't cut corners during training, nor did they play tricks. It's just that I used too much force. If I don't take a good rest, I'm afraid I won't even be able to get up tomorrow, let alone train. Jiang Pingji could not help but think of her first days in a low-level military school in her previous life. It was tiring but fulfilling. After training, she had a special muscle-soothing nutrient solution, which was good for relieving fatigue and maintaining her training condition. However, the medical technology in this era was so backward that she couldn't count on nutrient solutions. She couldn't even use them herself, so she could only use another method instead. Moreover, it had to be more in line with this era and not too scary. Suku thought back to those people's training. After a day of torment, they were really exhausted. When they had a big pot to eat, they were like hungry wolves. They fought for food faster than anyone else, as if they were afraid that they would not have enough to eat. Training consumed a lot of energy. Langjun, do you have a way to deal with it? Jiang Pingji said, of course I do. I'll go back and draw a picture for you. Just follow it. The method she was talking about was the most basic massage. Almost all the students in the military school knew the basic techniques. Low-level military schools were very common. Most of the students there were ordinary people. Not everyone had the luxury of using nutrient solutions to relieve the stress of training. If Jiang Pingji had not been born with high numbers and potential, she would not have been lucky enough to be chosen as the focus of training. Of course, if she wanted to maximize the benefits, it was best to condense her mental strength on her fingertips to stimulate the activity of the muscles. However, mental strength was a mysterious thing. If she said it out loud, people might mistake it as nonsense. Jiang Pingji spent some time to draw a few simple pictures. She added some words to make sure that Suku could understand. Suku took the pictures and looked at them. His expression softened a little. He said, "Langjun, thank you." It seemed that Langjun was quite reliable. While Jiang Pingji was drawing, there were also some viewers who were more careful. They used their phones or computers to record and take pictures. They wanted to try it out after taking a shower at night to see how it worked. Because of Jiang Pingji's arrangement, Suku lived in the farm during the early stages of training. He did not have to go back to the loos at night. If he needed to borrow any books, he could go back. All in all, except for the occasional unreliability of Langjun, the loos were treated very well. Suku tried to use his strength and found that his sprained foot did not hurt anymore. He stood up and sent her back. Before leaving, Jiang Pingji suddenly stopped and looked at Suku. Her gaze made Suku break out in cold sweat. "Langjun? Remember one thing. You are now my servant," Jiang Pingji said with an inexplicable meaning. Jiang Pingji said with an inexplicable meaning, "I'll let it go for today. From tomorrow onwards, remember this well." Suku's eyes were filled with suspicion. Then he suddenly understood and his face turned pale. "Don't be so afraid. If you have anything to say, just tell him directly. He won't not understand." Jiang Pingji curled her lips, slapped the sandalwood fan in her hand, and closed it with a swoosh. That night, Suku smiled bitterly at the brush and ink on the long table. After thinking for a while, he picked up the brush and put it on the bamboo paper. As the servant of the second Langjun of the loos, he received a fixed amount of brush, ink and bamboo paper, in addition to the money he received every month. When the gods fight, the mortals suffer. It's not a good thing to be between the father and the son. But Langjun is right. Instead of suffering from both sides, it was better to stand firmly on one side. After Suku finished writing, he put the bamboo paper on the candle to warm it. When the ink was dry, he rolled it into a roll and walked to the porch. He waved at the sky. Not long after, a snow-white pigeon fluttered its wings and landed on his arm. It had a small bamboo tube tied to its claw. It was a messenger pigeon from Zhongzhou in the hinterland of the Central Plains to Dongqing. After a few years of development in Dongqing, as long as the family was wealthy, they would raise and train a few pigeons to send messages. "Coo-coo," Lu Shi heard the pigeons cry. He got up and picked up the pigeon. He took out the bamboo paper and read it quickly. After a long time, he could not help but laugh. Chapter 94. Jiang Pingji returned to the loos. As soon as she stepped through the gate, the system beeped and a mission letter popped up. System. Dear host Jiang Pingji, the results of the preliminary selection for your first fully interactive live stream have been released. The topic with the most votes is "I'm visiting a brothel in ancient times. Please complete the live stream within 3 days." It was an automatic notification from the system. Jiang Pingji glanced at it and then threw it into the system's trash can. I'm indeed visiting a brothel. Sure enough, this kind of thing always attracts people's curiosity. Jiang Pingji held her forehead. She had lost all hope for the viewers who did not go offline. She did not want to live stream anymore. If she blushed and drew a level advancement card, wouldn't that mean that her experience would become 10,000? The system said quietly, "Actually, I want to go too." Jiang Pingji was speechless. A system that only had data and no substance. Why would it want to go to a brothel? It was incompetent. It was still early for her to return to the Lu residence. She first went to her courtyard to freshen up. Although she did not sweat much, she was still somewhat dirty after shuttling back and forth in the fields for a long time. Moreover, she still had to endure Taksha's nagging. "Langjun, you are so precious. You can just leave everything to Suko. You have to do it yourself." "That's great. I've never seen Langjun look so dirty. 2 of his handkerchiefs are dirty." Jiang Pingji knew very well that she could not argue with the woman at this time, because no matter how reasonable she was, it would be unreasonable. Silence was the best comfort. As expected, Taksha felt that Jiang Pingji's attitude was good. She finally stopped nagging and closed her mouth. At that moment, Jiang Pingji did not expect Suku to have the guts to play a trick on her. Jiang Pingji accompanied Lu Shi and Madame Hu for dinner. She was in a good mood and ate 2 more bowls of rice. She ate more than Lu Shi and Madame Hu combined, but she put down her chopsticks at the same time as them. Lanting is still growing. Ask the kitchen to make 2 more meat dishes. Lu Shi had never had a good appetite, but when he looked at his daughter's face, he could eat a bowl of rice without stopping. Madame Hu, who knew him very well, secretly rolled her eyes. She couldn't be bothered to maintain her usual elegant demeanor. Madame Hu did not want to be known as someone who mistreated the late wife's son. She did not want to remind Lu Shi that he was sitting next to his daughter and not his son. If she continued to feed him without restraint, he would be so fat that he would be slaughtered by the end of the year. Jiang Pingji had never had the concept of gaining weight. To her, the food she ate would only become firm muscles, not fat. After shyly thanking Lu Shi, Jiang Pingji resumed her posture of looking down and wondering when Lu Shi would speak. It wasn't that she didn't know that Lu Shi always asked about her life through Su Ku. His original intention was to care about her and nothing else. His original intention was not bad. She actually quite enjoyed this kind of concern. But Jiang Pingji was rational. She knew that she could not enjoy it for long. If she did not stop it soon, it would one day become a malignant tumor and become the root of the rift between father and son. Even the most intimate people had to maintain a certain distance, especially between a father and a son. The former had the natural responsibility to raise the latter. She had a very strong personality. She couldn't stand other people telling her what to do for no reason. She also couldn't accept other people trying to control her life all the time. It was like a steel cage imprisoning her in a corner of the world, even if that person was Lu Shi. She could enjoy it if it happened once or twice, but she could not guarantee that she would not fall out with him. So to prevent the worst from happening, it was better to make things clear as soon as possible. If Lu Shi wanted to know something, he could ask her directly instead of going through a third party. But she did not expect Lu Shi to not play by the rules. He did not feel embarrassed at all when he confessed that he knew about his daughter through Su Ku. What he said made Jiang Pingji want to kneel in front of him. Su Ku sent me a messenger pigeon. He said that you were curious about Lang Lang Alley. It was dessert time for the family. It was also a time to talk and cultivate their relationship. The atmosphere was not as dull as it was during dinner. Jiang Pingji asked, "What?" Madame Hu glared at Lu Shi. She looked like she would strangle him if he said another word. "Yes, I did," Jiang Pingji admitted. She was not only curious, but she also planned to go to the alley the next day. "But why did you bring this up all of a sudden, father?" She looked at Madame Hu and motioned for Lu Shi to calm down. Talking about brothels with his son in front of his concubine? Was he not afraid of being beaten to death? However, Lu Shi was too cunning. How could he betray Su Ku? "You are not young anymore. There are some things that you should know." Lu Shi raised his eyebrows at her suggestively. Jiang Pingji almost choked on the tea she was holding in her mouth. Before she could cough, Madame Hu raised her hand and flipped the table in front of her into the air. It fell to the ground with a loud crash. Madame Hu gritted her teeth and shouted at Lu Shi, "Lu Zhongqing." Lu Shi did not have the slightest idea that his backyard was in trouble. Instead he smiled gently. "Cousin, do you want to go too?" Jiang Pingji was speechless. Not only did he talk about brothels in front of his concubine, he even asked if she wanted to go with him. Jiang Pingji wanted to kneel in front of her. "Be careful, Sister Amin might come and strangle you to death tonight." "You're really?" Madame Hu's face turned red with anger. She was so angry, but Lu Shi was still smiling calmly. He was not affected in the slightest. Madame Hu flung her sleeves angrily and strode out of the main courtyard. "That's her temper. Don't be scared." Lu Shi regained his gentle and serious look. "It's normal for someone your age to be curious about that kind of place. Instead of waiting for you to go there quietly and run into something you can't handle, it's better for me to bring you there and broaden your horizons. Once you see it with your own eyes, you won't be curious anymore." Jiang Pingji was speechless. It was a good reason, but why did she feel that something was wrong? "Father, you don't seem surprised at all." Jiang Pingji swore that it was not Lu Shi's first time going to that kind of place. It was a lie to say that he loved Gu Min. "I used to be your age. How could I not know?" Lu Shi was very open-minded. His eyes were clear and gentle. "By the way, your mother was the one who encouraged me to go there for the first time." Jiang Pingji was speechless. Chapter 95. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Lu Shi said gently, "The harmony of yin and yang is the right thing to do. What's there to be shy about?" When a teenager, or girl, reaches a certain age, their curiosity toward the opposite sex will reach a high level. It's as if there's a soft claw scratching at their hearts. Stopping them with righteous words or reprimanding them for a long time will only stimulate their rebellious mentality. Jiang Pingji was speechless. She was afraid that if she said a few more words, her father would turn back to his room and toss her 2 paintings of avoiding fire. Thinking about that beautiful scene was too painful for her eyes. She didn't dare to look at it. "Speaking of which, father, have you forgotten that you are raising a daughter, not a son?" Lu Shi made the decision and said, "There's no time like the present. Let's do it today. Jiang Pengji maintained a calm expression on her face, but she was already cursing the system in her heart. I feel like I've come to a pirated ancient era. How can someone like Lu Shi survive in such an environment? The system pretended to be dead again. After all, Gu Min's appearance in this era was inseparable from it. Forget it. Let's do it tonight. I don't want to have to make a trip in the future. The audience in the streaming room was surprised to find that the streaming room, which had been closed for less than 2 hours, was back up again. There was also an option to vote on audience satisfaction. The subtitle of the streaming room was, "A Night at a Brothel in the Ancient Era?" Awesome streamer. Pudding is not pudding, what the F***CK. It's rare for me to come in, but I'm so lucky to have such an important stream. The streaming room had a maximum audience of 3,000, but there were many who wanted to watch the stream. Many people watched Jiang Pengji stream through videos. Even though they had never entered the streaming room, Jiang Pengji's unique style left a deep impression on them. Peacock Southeast flies. Is the streamer going to have sex with a human? Will it be banned? Last time, there was a streamer on the roasted fish platform who broadcast the process of making a human. However, it wasn't long before it was banned by the management. In the end, she was even called over by the police for tea. Liang Feng Yoshing, come on, the streaming room is amazing. I have a relative who works on the grilled fish platform. He told me that although the host's room number can be found, they don't have the data at all, so they can't block it. Chiyue Wu Bian? In other words, if the streamer really wants to put on a big show, we can also watch as much as we want? Dolly Buting, no way, the host looks like she's still underage. What's so good about her figure? She's just a frying pan. They are indifferent to you because the value you offer them is not high enough, and what they can get is too little. It has nothing to do with other affairs. If it was still in the Xia dynasty, Langlang Alley would have been an extraordinary place. It was just a place of prostitution, but there were so many extraordinary women. But after the establishment of Dongqing, Langlang Alley became an ordinary place of prostitution. Many brothels opened along the street. That's what you see now. It is a place where ordinary men and women seek pleasure. It looks prosperous, but it is actually rotten. The carriage passed through the long street full of red lanterns and drove into an alley. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly and the smell in the air became lighter. It was neither too light nor too strong. It was like a dandelion brushing against the back of one's hand, itchy and smooth. Here we are. Jiang Pengji lifted the curtain and read the words on the plaque. Hanyan Courtyard? Shall we go in? It was more of a mansion than a courtyard. The facade was neat and tidy, and it was several times bigger than the Lu mansion. Lu Shi closed his eyes and thought for a while. He changed his mind and said, "No, let's find another one." What? Jiang Pengji asked in confusion. She also asked the question that was on everyone's mind. You don't look interested at all. Although this Hanyan Courtyard is a place of prostitution, the women there are all talented women who are good at music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Many patrons come to our door not for the joy of family relations, but more to drink a few cups of sake. The more advanced a brothel was, the more noble the women there were. Some of them were as good as the women of noble families. Chapter 96. Lu Shi paused and his expression turned strange. After a long time he said, "Your mother calls this behavior pretentious of a beast in human clothing. Love go little say, net dubby. Chumen who come to Langlang Alley to seek pleasure must come from well-off families and have many wives and concubines. However, they still like to come to this kind of place. Why do you think they do so? It's not because of the women's looks but because of their talents." There were few literate women, and women who were well-read, talented, and considerate were even rarer. Those men didn't have a common language with their wives and concubines at home, and they couldn't talk for a long time. But when they came to Langlang Alley, they could find their soulmates and talk happily. It was more satisfying than having sex. It was hard for people who weren't of the same kind to understand. At first, Lu Shi thought it made sense, but as soon as he expressed his opinion, Gu Min scolded him. "Mother, you're such a clever person. You're so insightful." Jiang Pengji agreed. Wasn't it pretentious of a beast in human clothing? If that's the case, Langlang Alley should be quiet. Why don't you go there, father? Lu Shi looked down and said, "You like crowds. I don't think you'll find an atmosphere you like there." Jiang Pengji was speechless. Pudding is not pudding. No one knows a daughter better than her father. Father, let me give you a like. Xian, wow, the host's father is still so cute. It feels super harmonious when father and daughter get along. Especially when the host's father teases the host seriously. I can feel the host's powerlessness in the bullet screen. Chow Zhao Mu Mu, haha, the host has met her nemesis. Now, I bet on a spicy stick that the host's inner bullet screen is full of sh*t. Lu Shi picked a brothel with a large area and a lot of customers. The name was very tacky, Yingchun Brothel. Even though Lu Shi had left Hejin County for many years and no one remembered his face, his elegance coupled with his exquisite silk cloak made him stand out in the crowd. He was the kind that could be found in a sea of people at a glance. The brothel keeper's eyes lit up, and she welcomed her enthusiastically. Jiang Pingji could not help but think of the woman broker she saw in the broker house that day. Yes, please come in. The brothel keeper waved her fragrant handkerchief. Lu Shi furrowed his brows and took a step back to avoid the brothel keeper's hand. Find the prettiest woman here to serve me. I want a private room and don't be too noisy. Lu Shi's expression remained cold and indifferent. He wasn't as frivolous or joyful as other men who were looking for pleasure. The madam was puzzled, but she had been in the brothel for many years. She had good judgment. The man in front of her was obviously not here to have fun. Thus, the madam lowered her head slightly and silently met Jiang Pingji's gaze. So he was the one who was looking for pleasure. The madam instantly knew the truth. Her heavily made-up face bloomed like a flower. Don't worry, sir. In this area, everyone knows that the girls in our Yingchun house are the best. I guarantee you will enjoy yourself to the fullest. After saying that, the madam turned around and called for a skinny girl in green to lead the two to a private room. The madam looked to be in her early 30s. In the eyes of the people of this era, she was already middle-aged. However, the charm that she exuded was not something that young ladies could imitate. Her charm was still there, so Jiang Pingji watched her leave. Lu Shi looked down and asked Jiang Pingji what was wrong with his eyes. Jiang Pingji opened the sandalwood fan in her hand and used it to cover her face. Only a pair of smiling eyes could be seen. The way that Madame walks reminds me of a phrase, swaying. The corner of Lu Shi's mouth twitched. He made an "oh" sound as if he had nothing left to live for. Why did he feel that something was not right? Please follow me, Lang Jun. The girl in green was still young. She looked to be no more than 10 years old. However, after living in such a place for a long time, she had developed an extraordinary eye for people. Whether it was the way she spoke or the way she bowed, she looked very proper. Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows and suppressed her 5 senses. Only then did she feel better. The private room was not small. When the girl in green opened the door, the elegant attire that came into view was refreshing. A private room, a private room. It lives up to the word elegant. Go get someone to prepare a table of light vegetarian dishes and bring 2 pots of sake over. Jiang Pingji looked around and then sat down at the 4-corner table in the middle of the private room. She leaned against the table and seemed to be enjoying herself. By the way, do you have any girls who sing for fun? Pudding is not pudding. I'll bet a spicy stick that the streamer is a veteran. Didn't you see the look of despair on her father's face? The livestream audience member said what Lu Shi was thinking. He was a little nervous when he saw that his daughter was familiar with the place and did not seem to have any stage fright at all. Could it be that before he came back, his daughter was already a regular customer here? Lu Shi could be considered calm, but he could no longer remain calm. Jiang Pingji could read the voice in Lu Shi's mind. She raised her hand, flipped the teacup on the table, and poured herself a cup. Father, don't overthink it. It's my first time here. Lu Shi was speechless. She was trying to cover it up. Before the father and daughter could further discuss the issue, the figure who was kneeling outside the door bowed slightly. Lang Jun, the girls are here. Jiang Pingji said boldly, come in. Then the door opened and 2 girls about 16 or 17 years old came in. The material of their clothes was comparable to that of a normal girl from a wealthy family. Behind them were 4 girls who were holding musical instruments and had their hair combed into a girl's bun. The former sat next to Jiang Pingji and Lu Shi. One was delicate and the other was bright and beautiful. The latter sat quietly in the corner of the private room. Host V, do you want to sing? In a split second, the screen was filled with all kinds of song titles that were obviously not serious at a glance. Jiang Pingji saw one of them and turned to the 4 girls. Do you know how to sing 18 Moons? Even Lu Shi could not maintain his elegant demeanor at that moment. He spat out half a mouthful of tea that he had not yet swallowed. The girls who were singing looked at each other and their cheeks turned red. Although it was a place to seek pleasure and nothing was too excessive, it was rare to see someone as upright as Jiang Pingji and Lu Shi. Jiang Pingji was still young, but Lu Shi, who was beside her, was at the age where a man's charm was at its peak. There was an indescribable sense of shame in singing that kind of flirtatious song in front of such an immortal-like person. Go and serve her. I don't need anyone else here. Lu Shi quickly recovered and slightly tidied up his messy appearance. He did not look too good. Once again he firmly believed that it was not his daughter's first time here. Chapter 97. Lu Shi reflected on himself and pushed away the pretty girl who was trying to get close to him. Jiang Pingji held the fan and smiled. I'm just kidding. Just pick some soothing songs. She used her folding fan to lift the bright girl's chin and looked into the other's affectionate eyes. Sure enough, it was a pair of extremely beautiful limpid eyes that were just right. Not one bit more would make them look too weak and not one bit less would make them look too lifeless. Jiang Pingji complained to Lu Shi, "You are so insensitive. How can you reject such a beautiful girl so rudely? You have to be tactful if you want to reject her. Aren't you going to hurt her?" Lu Shi glanced at Jiang Pingji. His meaning was clear. What are you trying to do? After coming to Ingchun brothel, he found that his daughter had started to let herself loose. He was worried. Jiang Pingji knew when to stop. What if Lu Shi refused to pay the bill if things went too far? It was okay to have fun in a brothel, but it was too much not to pay. Jiang Pingji smiled wickedly, revealing her white teeth, as the audience in the streaming room howled and the bullet screen filled with jealousy and hate. Lu Shi found the scene a little hard to look at. There had been a rumor that his daughter was a playboy, but as her father, he didn't believe it. Then he was slapped in the face by his daughter's actions. Hey, what kind of fragrance does this fairy-like lady use on her body? Why does it smell so good? Lu Shi didn't pay attention to her for a while. Jiang Pingji was already talking to the two girls. They seemed to be very close. Lu Shi moved closer to the delicate girl. The girl's cheeks were flushed and she looked extremely shy. Lu Shi slowly moved closer to the girl's neck. From the outside, it looked as if she was half lying in the girl's arms. The two of them were so intimate that Lu Shi felt even more hopeless. The pretty girl blushed and said in a low voice, "I made all the perfume myself." The perfume on the market didn't suit everyone's skin. For the girls in the brothel, the condition of their skin was more important. The girls in the brothel were not to be underestimated. They all had their own unique skills. She was not good at making perfume herself. You made it yourself? This smell is indeed very unique. It's fragrant but not greasy, thick but not overwhelming and lingers for a long time. Truly fragrant. Jiang Pingji sniffed carefully again. If one paid close attention, one would notice that there was some interest in her eyes, as if she had found some evidence. This fragrance was somewhat familiar. It's good that Langjun likes it. I also like it, the woman said in a low voice, her face full of shyness. She was petite and dainty, not much taller than Jiang Pingji. Her posture was even more pitiful. When she lowered her head slightly and revealed her fair neck, this simple action could evoke the desire in a man's heart. Pudding is not pudding. Looking at this scene, I suddenly thought of a saying. I feel that it fits the situation very well. The gentleness of lowering one's head is just like the shyness of a water lotus in the cold wind. Dolly Buting, come on, no matter how pretty she is, she's still a prostitute. She's a whore who can sleep with anyone. What water lotus? She's not good enough. Now, what's wrong with the person above? Which word poked your d*ck? You watch the stream quietly, then jump out and step on others to show how clean you are. Xian, exactly. How noble are you to stand on the moral high ground and look down on her. Lanky Yubus, before looking down on their work, first consider the context of the era and think from another angle. Don't spout sh*t at the beginning. Where's your quality? Dolly Buting, hee a bunch of saints. If they were so compassionate, why don't you suggest that the streamer save them? Their mouths are incessant. To put it bluntly, it's easier said than done. They're just whores. What did I say wrong? They're whores that make money when they open their legs. This streamer is also a horse. Jiang Pingji looked at the sudden chaos in the streaming room and frowned. The flames of war had spread to her. Chuyue Wu Bian, whores are heartless and entertainers are unjust. I really don't know what's the use of arguing about this. The streamer didn't even say anything. If she didn't control it, the streaming room would become a slaughterhouse. Although Jiang Pingji could ignore the comments, she had a certain understanding of the audience. Once their emotions were extreme, they could say anything disgusting. It was annoying to watch. Streamer V. From the perspective of employment, they're also women in the workplace. They have a job to support themselves. It's just that the job doesn't look good to you. Moreover, it's difficult to survive in today's world. There are countless cases of people selling their children and exchanging their children for food. Although they're despised by others, the quality of their lives is very decent. I don't think others have any right to despise them. I can only say that everyone has their own way of living. It's okay to disagree, but please respect them. Sometimes, Jiang Pingji couldn't understand the thoughts of ancient and modern humans such as now. In her era, this profession had been legal for thousands of years. It even had its own complete industry chain. From the perspective of federal law, this was in line with human rights because everyone had the right to control their own bodies. This was an inherent wealth. Therefore, she really couldn't understand why the audience in the streaming room were arguing. While she was still in a daze, the pretty girl beside her winked at her. She was young, but she had a kind of youthful and mature charm. She was quite attractive. Her eyes were full of charm, and her full lips seemed to be alluring. Langjun, do you like this fragrance? I've smelled it before, so when I smell the fragrance on your body, it's especially familiar. However, although this fragrance smells good in my eyes, it's not even 1/10,000th of your appearance. I feel like I've seen you in a dream. Lu Shi ate the vegetables with a cold face. The location was not right, so he didn't want to drink at all. He didn't want to be taken advantage of when he was drunk. If the person in front of him was a son, he would throw a fire-repelling painting and find a prostitute to eat. He was devoted to Ah Min, but he couldn't expect his son to be alone. However, the point was, he only had his daughter. To put it crudely, visiting a brothel was nothing, but did his daughter have the tools to commit the crime? The beautiful girl who was chased away by Lu Shi was ignored. Of course she wouldn't let it go. She covered her lips with an embroidered handkerchief. Her eyebrows were full of charm. She said, Langjun, you only care about teasing your sister. Have you forgotten about me? How can that be? It's obvious that my sister is ignoring me. Otherwise, why would she sit so far away? Then, what about this? She moved closer and rested her forehead on his shoulder. If that's the case, do you still blame me for ignoring you? I can't wait to be happy. How can I bear to blame you? Lu Shi, who was silently watching his daughter and the two girls teasing each other, was speechless. Chapter 98. Not long after, a slightly familiar voice floated over with a hint of hostility. Hee hee, you old woman. I gave you so much money, but didn't I say that before I leave Hejian County, these two can only serve me? You, on the other hand, took advantage of the fact that I haven't been here for a few days and directly made the decision to have them serve others. Aren't you slapping my face? Without waiting for the madam to speak, a young man's voice, as clear as spring water brushing against a mountain stream, was heard. Lu Shi's eyes lit up. Lu Shi was like Jiang Pingji. Not only was he obsessed with appearances, but he was also obsessed with voices. Forget it, Jingza. If you like it, you can ask 2 more courtesans to serve you. Why do you have to hold on to those 2 and offend them? Hearing the familiar voice, Jiang Pingji could not help but smile. She looked meaningfully at the pretty girl who took the initiative to lean into her arms. TSK. What is this called? It's fate. Tudu Feichio. Is there something wrong with my ears? Why do I feel like I heard the young man's voice? Aya Jiaoting, you didn't hear wrong. I remember Jingza is the courtesy name of Wumajun and Fongjin have a good relationship. TSK. I feel like my heart is broken. Why is Fongjin here? Jiang Pingji saw the change in Lu Shi's expression. Although he hated Fongjin, he didn't seem to recognize his voice. Outside the door, Wumajun frowned. He was dissatisfied with Fongjin's behavior. Fongjin was always against him. No matter what he said, Fongjin could refute him. It was annoying and disgusting. The more Fongjin objected, the more rebellious he became. He pushed aside the brothel keeper with one hand, ignored her pleading eyes and pushed the door open. The girls who were singing stopped because of the commotion. The 2 groups of people outside and inside the door looked at each other in silence. Fongjin, Wumajun, Jiang Pingji was not affected at all. She smiled and said, Sisters, why did you stop? The faces of the women who were playing and singing stiffened, but they quickly returned to their working state. Their voices were a little soft, sweet and sticky. It was as if they could penetrate into one's heart. Jiang Pingji was not used to it at first, but after listening to it for a while, she felt that it was quite nice and charming. Even though Fongjin and Wumajun didn't know Lu Shi, they knew Jiang Pingji, Lu Shi's son Lu Shi. At this moment it was a little awkward. He cupped his hands and said, cough. I didn't know it was Lu Langjun in the room. Please forgive me for being rude. Wumajun had the intention to win Jiang Pingji over to his side. Now that he had made such a big mistake, How could he not find a way to make up for it? Feng Jin felt even more awkward and uncomfortable. Were his eyes playing tricks on him? The man who had two beauties on his left and right who was teasing two girls and laughing so hard, was Lu Shi? A real warrior dared to face the fact that his female companions were drinking and hugging women in the brothel. Feng Jin was slightly embarrassed. Jiang Pingji gestured for him to step into the room. Wuma Jun entered as well. Huayu, let me introduce you. Jiang Pingji did not think that the atmosphere was not awkward enough. She called out Feng Jin's courtesy name. Of course, Feng Jin did not realize that something was wrong. Close friends always called each other by their courtesy names. However, he did not realize the identity of the man sitting in front of him. Lu Shi, Feng Huayu? Feng Jin looked like he was all ears, but when Jiang Pingji said the first sentence, he could not take it anymore. This is my father. Feng Jin, Lu Shi's father was Hejian's Lu Shi or Hu County Chief Lu Zhongqing. So, he quietly turned his head to look at Lu Shi, only to find that Lu Shi was also looking at him coldly. What kind of experience was it to be caught in Yingchen House by his father's good friend? Feeling hopeless under Feng Jin braced himself and said, Uncle Lu. Jiang Pingji did not seem to notice it. She continued to introduce, Father, this is Feng Jin whom I mentioned to you before. Lu Shi took a sip of tea and maintained his sitting posture. He did not even raise his eyebrows. He softly responded, yes. Wuma Jun's face was twisted. His joy was mixed with fear and panic. He indeed wanted to rope in Lu Zhongqing, but in his plan he should have paid Lu Zhongqing a visit himself, generously dissecting his own talents and abilities, using his own charisma to pull Lu Zhongqing over to his side and obtain political support. But the result? Their first meeting, Yingchen House. Lu Shi's son. Although Dongqing's officialdom strictly forbade officials from having sex, Lu Shi's position was different from others. This was Hejian County, which was far away from the emperor. No one could use this to shake his position. If they did, there would be no officials in the whole of Dongqing. This is Huayu's good friend, Wuma Jun. His courtesy name is Zhengze. Jiang Pingji was probably the only one who could maintain a good mood and enjoy the show. She, a pure woman, was having fun, while the three men looked at each other. The atmosphere was so awkward that it made people feel like they were about to explode. Feng Jin, who had always been eloquent, was now sitting obediently in his seat. His posture was obviously very standard, but in Jiang Pingji's eyes he was as delicate and pitiful as a quail. He was trembling with fear and was truly quiet like a chicken. She looked around and realized that Lu Shi did not seem to be controlling his aura at all. Jiang Pingji added fuel to the fire. Huayu, do you want me to call a wife over? Feng Jin secretly glared at her. His meaning was obvious. Was she trying to kill him? Lu Shi looked down and spoke like an elder talking to a junior. Huayu, are you married? Feng Jin broke into a cold sweat. He was not afraid of Lu Shi, but he was afraid that the news would spread to his family. Even though he had only accompanied Wuma Jun and had never done anything out of line, no one would believe him. Feng Jin said respectfully, I'm still young. I'm not married yet. Not engaged? Lu Shi continued to ask. He did not care about Wuma Jun. After all, he did not know Wuma Jun well. He did not like Wuma Jun's father, the current emperor of Dongqing. Feng Jin calmed down. He felt that Lu Shi was going to say something. Not engaged yet. In Dongqing there were many 16-year-old noblemen like Feng Jin who were not engaged yet. He was talented and good-looking. He could make a name for himself before he turned 20. By then, his social status would be different. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was young and talented. It would be better to talk about marriage. Jiang Pingji secretly glanced at Lu Shi. She was afraid that he would say something about Feng Jin marrying into the Lu family. After all, Lu Shi's drunken words left a deep impression on her. Chapter 99. Feng Jin's eyelids twitched. Xianda was his father's courtesy name. Although he was a junior, he had heard that Lu Shi and Feng Ren were close. As for the words, he has a daughter, Feng Jin was shocked. He was like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bow. However, he had always been smart. He knew that Jiang Pingji's identity as a female was a secret. Few people knew about it and Lu Shi had no intention of revealing it. Therefore, Lu Shi only had one son. His mistress's daughter was not worthy of Feng Jin's identity. Therefore, he was just being polite. Therefore, Feng Jin did not have to worry that he would be like Jiang Pingji in the future, strong and masculine. Although he did not expect to have a mistress after marriage, he did not want to fight all day. he would still be the one getting beaten up. Your nephew appreciates uncle's kindness. Even if we can't become in-laws, I and Lanting are close friends. We are better than brothers. Then Feng Jin secretly looked at Jiang Pingji for help. He hoped that his friend could help him attract some attention. I often hear Shinda praise you three brothers. You all have the talent to be a king. If my useless son could be 3 times as capable as you brothers, I wouldn't have to worry about him in the future. Lu Shi said derogatory words about Jiang Pingji, but his expression showed otherwise. Although Feng Jin was not as sweet as his younger brother, he did know how to read people's faces. Uncle, you flatter me. My father scolded me for being stupid and not being flexible. How can I be a king? As for Lanting, although I haven't known her for long, I can see that she has a good mind. She is not as mediocre as you said. He had belittled himself and flattered Jiang Pingji. He secretly wiped the sweat off his forehead. He hoped that the troublesome Uncle Lu would let him go. It was a small matter to be put in a difficult position now. What he was afraid of was that one day he would write to his father and spill the beans. Jiang Pingji looked at the interaction between the two coldly. She snorted softly and turned to talk to Wuma Jun. Is Wuma Langjun also here to seek pleasure? At first, Wuma Jun was quite happy that Jiang Pingji was willing to take the initiative to talk to him to ease the awkward situation of him being ignored. However, she asked such a shameful question which made him feel a little regretful. It would have been better if he had been ignored. No matter how he answered this question, it didn't seem to work. If he admitted that he was here to have fun, wouldn't that be smearing his own name and causing Lu Zhongqing's first impression of him to fall to rock bottom? If he denied it, it would be even worse. As a man, he dared to take responsibility for his actions. How could he not dare to admit such a small matter? If he didn't have the guts and backbone, what great things could he achieve in the future? After going through the 2 answers in his mind, Wuma Jun chose to avoid answering because a direct answer would definitely be wrong. I came with Huayu, but why is Lanting here? With that, he could not help but sweep his gaze over the 2 women, and a wave of displeasure rose in his heart. It was not that he valued the 2 prostitutes, but he was unhappy that no one had asked for his permission and had touched his people. Even if that person was the son of Lu Zhongqing whom he wanted to rope in, he still did not like it. However, Wuma Jun would not show his emotions. Instead, he buried them deeper, making it hard for others to see through them. Of course, that did not include Jiang Pingji. Of course, my father brought me here. She told the truth and ignored Wuma Jun's ugly expression, as if he had eaten a fly. He was worried that I would be too curious and would not be able to resist other people's instigation. Instead of that, it would be better for him to bring me here personally to broaden my horizons. The more he tried to stop it, the easier it would cause reverse psychology. If he showed it openly, it would be easier for people to lose interest and treat him with a normal attitude. Wuma Jun could not wrap his head around it. What was the connection between the 2? Even so, according to the power of the Lu family, what kind of women can't they get? Why bother to come to such a chaotic place? Wuma Jun did not understand. In his opinion, a normal man would hint to his wife and ask her to arrange a servant girl for his child. What kind of father would bring his son to a brothel? He had never seen or heard of such a thing. Jiang Pingji suddenly smiled. You should not ask me this question. You should ask those who indulge in sensual pleasures and linger in the southern courtyard of the brothel. In terms of wealth and power, they are much more powerful than me. Why do they like to come to this kind of place? Wuma Jun's face froze. At that moment, the pretty girl who was half leaning on Jiang Pingji's shoulder smiled foolishly. Langjun, why do you think so? Of course, because the flowers at home are not as fragrant as wild flowers. A legitimate wife, a legitimate concubine, these were all things that were already in the bag. If you want to have sex, you can do it at any time, but the women outside are different. Only those that you can't have are worth thinking about, Jiang Pingji said calmly. There was no longer a smile on her face. She looked at Wuma Jun with sarcasm in her eyes. If the 2 women had not come to the private room but waited for Wuma Jun obediently, he would have been forgotten after a few times. The main reason he refused to let go of the matter was that he had been humiliated. It had nothing to do with the 2 women. Don't you think I'm right, Master Wuma? Lu Shi had been paying attention to the situation. He laughed and scolded, what sense? It's all a bunch of twisted logic. Twisted logic is still logic. It's just not as straightforward as other logic. After that, she turned to the girl beside her and whispered something in her ear. The girl's cheeks suddenly turned red. Langjun, please come with me. Jiang Pingji stood up and flicked her sleeves. She casually tilted her head and said to Lu Shi, Father, Please enjoy your conversation. I won't stay any longer. After that, she followed the two girls out of the private room and went to one of the boudoirs. Lucy was speechless. Lucy was not the only one who was dumbfounded. Even though Jiang Pingji did not say it explicitly, they could understand what she was hinting at. Was he going to sleep in the same bed with the two girls? 3 girls together? While Feng Jin's nerves were out of control, he secretly observed Lu Shi's expression. But the older, the wiser. If Lu Shi was the kind of rookie who showed his emotions and was seen through by the younger generation, he would not be able to stay in Dongqing's officialdom. Feng Jin could not read the slightest emotion from Lu Shi's face. He could not help but feel suspicious. Could it be that Uncle Lu did not know that Lanting was a girl? Feng Jin suddenly felt awkward. If Lu Shi really did not know and he took the initiative to tell Lu Shi, it would be a despicable act. Apart from that, he could not explain how he knew that Lu Shi was a girl. He could not say that it was a dark and windy night when Lu Shi escaped from the bandits' lair. Her clothes were messy and a corner of her doo-doo was exposed. Her hair was messy at that time and it showed that she was a girl. If he dared to say that, he would be courting death. What if Lu Shi asked him to take responsibility for Lu Shi's reputation? Chapter 100. Feng Jin was in a dilemma. Elsewhere, Jiang Pingji arrived at one of the ladies' chambers. The furnishings in the room were warm and elegant, and every corner was filled with the aura of a young girl. You're not feeling well. Drink some sweet water and go to bed early. Jiang Pingji smiled at the pretty girl, Sierra, and said gently, or should I ask someone to bring you some blood-enriching soup? Sierra's eyes lit up and she looked at Jiang Pingji. Huh. Sierra thought Jiang Pingji was there for fun, but she didn't expect her to say that. Chun was at a loss as well. It's your period. Why don't you pay attention? Jiang Pingji said with a smile, don't drink alcohol or eat cold food for the next few days. Period? The two girls looked at each other. Maybe it was psychological, but Xia felt a slight pain in her lower abdomen after hearing Jiang Pingji's words. There was a faint warmth flowing down her lower body. Her face turned red and white and she didn't know how to react. Jiang Pingji didn't know how women in this era dealt with their periods, but it wasn't easy. I don't know how you girls deal with such situations, so I brought you both here. I'll have to trouble you Chun to help her out. The faint smell of blood on Sierra's body grew stronger, and her fair face turned red under Jiang Pingji's gaze. Most women in the brothel had irregular periods, and many of them had minor problems that they were ashamed of. Xia, for example, had irregular periods every month. When she felt pain, her limbs would turn cold and even her molars would hurt. She tried to sit properly, but even the slightest movement caused her to twitch in pain, which made her shy and anxious. Jiang Pingji looked at the two girls' reactions and took the initiative to sit behind the screen. She blocked the camera in the streaming room from her view. Jiaoting, I thought the host would have sex with the girl. I didn't expect her to be on her period under Wajio. I want to repent. When the host left the private room with the girl, I thought there was going to be an erotic scene. I didn't expect it to be for this. Although it's different from what I imagined, the host is super gentle. I wish I had a boyfriend like the host. 8,000 years of parting Wujiang Jia Kai. Same repentance plus one Xiao Qingqing. I'm in a daze. Although I know it's inhumane to laugh at this time, if the host was a man, he would probably be depressed. Just as he was about to have some fun with the girl, she was on her period, she would definitely vomit blood out of depression. Jiang Pingji sat behind the screen. There was a tea table beside her. She poured herself a cup and raised her eyebrows. Host V, that's not right. That's a smile. If I were a man, I might not be depressed and vomit blood in such a situation. After all, there were still the eastern and western palaces to relieve my worries. If Thumbelina wasn't up to it, he could still be a little more beastly, such as Jade Blood Cleansing Silver Snatch. Of course, this kind of behavior was too demented. A bunch of rookies still wanted to compete with her in dirty jokes. Jiang Pingji was surprised and took a sip of tea leisurely. The style of the bullet screen had completely changed. Chenxiu Yubi Wujiang Zhatsai. My streamer is amazing. I didn't expect you to be such a filthy, sick streamer. Sunset Sun. Sob 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 sob. Old driver is driving the train over there. What did you hear? Tudu Feiqiu. Filthy voice. Lovelorn front Lianming. I'm speechless. I can't believe I'm watching a female streamer act like a hooligan under Space. Baigui Yeshing. So what if she's a hooligan? If my boyfriend could be like the streamer, no, at least 1/10 of her, I could have sex with him every day. I'd be unhappy if she didn't act like a hooligan. You don't understand, it's better to *ck her back. Jiang Pingji always complained that she had 3,000 veterans in her streaming room, but she never thought that birds of a feather flocked together. Different streamers would attract different kinds of viewers. She was an experienced veteran, so how could she complain that others were too filthy? Jiang Pingji glanced at the bullet screen of Baigui Yexing and thought about it carefully. It was so meaningful. Time passed quietly as people watched the bullet screen and drank tea. The rustling sound of clothes rubbing against each other came from behind the screen, and it gradually quieted down. Not long after, the screen was quietly pushed open. Sura had changed into a new set of clothes, but her face was still flushed. Langjun, I'm not feeling well today. I'm afraid I can't serve you. Chun continued, if you don't mind my appearance then? Jiang Pingji smiled and shook her head. The other person's face turned pale. I'm afraid you've misunderstood me. I didn't mean that. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and gestured for them to sit down. Her expression was still gentle. I feel happy and satisfied to be able to look at you two like this. If I do anything else, wouldn't I be desecrating this beauty? It's easy to get love, but it's hard to find a true friend. Both of them were young. They had been bought by the brothel keeper when they were young and trained. They had been prostitutes for a few years. What kind of people had they not seen? Whether it was true or false, it couldn't be hidden from their eyes. Everyone said that whores were heartless and entertainers were heartless. Wasn't it because they had long seen through the hypocrisy of others? How could it be so easy to exchange false feelings for true feelings? Especially the true feelings of prostitutes who had seen through the affairs of the world? What kind of sweet words had they not heard in their daily lives? They just listened to it and didn't take it seriously. But when it came from Jiang Pingji, they subconsciously chose to believe it. When they came back to their senses, they didn't feel that it was wrong. The older Xia smiled bitterly. Langjun, you're flattering me. I'm just a broken flower. How can I deserve such praise? People say that beauty is in the bones, not the skin, but I think beauty is in the heart, not the bones. Looks are given by one's parents. No one can choose, but character and temperament are acquired. Both of you have a pure heart in the mortal world. How can you not be beautiful? Jiang Pingji wasn't just praising them. She had her reasons. Most of the women in the brothel had been raised since they were young. Except for a few who were born beautiful and had great potential, most of them were used as maids. They were beaten and scolded at every turn. They were at the bottom of the food chain in the brothel. Not only did they have to face all kinds of customers who made things difficult for them and took advantage of them, but they also had to endure the torture of the women they served. If they were unlucky enough to meet some violent ones, they might lose their lives. Jiang Pingji had a sensitive sense of smell. When she passed by the maids in the hall, she smelled the fragrance of medicine on them. Although their steps were steady, their balance was not natural. It meant that they were injured and had been treated with medicine. Jiang Pingji wasn't familiar with the medicine in this world, so she couldn't smell the ingredients. But one of the medicines was the second lady's decoction. It wasn't very expensive, but it wasn't something that a maid like her could use. If the maids were valued enough to use medicine, why would the brothel allow the customers to humiliate them? It didn't make sense. If it wasn't from the brothel, then where did it come from? When Jiang Pingji smelled the fragrance of Chun'er's makeup, she got the answer. When she arrived, she saw that there was a wooden box in the corner that had not been completely covered, and this small question was solved. Chapter 101. Langjun is so young, but you're already so good at sweet talking. When you grow up, I wonder how many girls you'll disappoint. Love, Gon Little say, Net Wuxia held the handkerchief in her hand and used it to cover her lips. Even someone like me is tempted, much less the other girls. Jiang Pingji had always been able to tell the difference between truth, lies and jokes. Miss Ya, you're wrong. Even if it's sweet talking, there's still a difference. Jiang Pingji continued, to me, all the beautiful girls in the world are as precious as jade plates. Of course, they should be treated with the utmost respect. My sweet talking is from the bottom of my heart and it's not frivolous at all. As for other men, if they have bad intentions, even if they can name a flower, they'll still be acting like a hooligan. As soon as she finished speaking, the two girls were amused. They felt as if they had eaten honey. Just as Jiang Pingji said, her words were from the bottom of her heart. That was why they were so touching. Even though the two girls were used to romance, they were still affected. However, they had seen many modest but arrogant gentry. It was the first time they saw one who liked to boast so much. It was a little funny. Sierra laughed and said, yes, Langjun is a gentleman. Rimu Xiang, life is lovely. JPG. Mama asked me why I kneel to watch the stream under smiley face 3, angle. Under Shikanki Bi Wujiang Jetsai. I also kneel to watch the stream. If I had the streamer skills, why would I still be single? Jiang Pingji smiled and took the tea made by Xia. Although the ingredients were not as expensive as the ones in the loos, the taste was more exquisite. Love go little say, net w. Chu she felt her body heat up as soon as she took a sip. It warmed her heart and drove away the coldness of early spring. Host V, Qianqiu Bi Wujiang Jetsai, that's not right. I've always been single. It didn't mean that she could get rid of her single status. For example, she had a bunch of close friends and brothers, but none of them had developed a relationship. After all, not everyone could endure days without any secrets. The pressure was too great. Chenqiu Yu Bi Wujiang Zhakai, oh no. After hearing what the host said, I feel like I'm going to be single until I die. In the eyes of many livestream viewers, the prostitutes in the brothels were all prostitutes. Other than stripping and having sex, they seemed to have no other skills. On the other hand, Chun'er and Xia had taught them a harsh lesson. They knew what it meant to be proficient in the four arts. Other than these skills, they were also proficient in the classics and history books. One should know that the literacy rate was so low that it was scary. When he played other musical instruments, he had the demeanor of a master of accumulating points. Under Jiang Pingji's secret guidance, the whole streaming room was in a state of Host V. Some viewers despised them before, but I just want to say that those viewers don't even have the right to despise them. How could the self-restraint of the four arts compare to others? In your era you would be a top student at the very least. They are not very talented, but in order to survive, they try their best to learn and enrich themselves. This in itself is worthy of respect. Do you have the right to despise them? In my opinion, there is nothing to criticize about them, including the means that you despise to survive by selling your bodies. Jiang Pingji still did not understand where some people in the streaming room got their sense of superiority from. Indeed, there was a generation gap. Rimu Xiang, that makes some sense. I suddenly thought of some old jokes about transmigration. The female protagonist must go to a brothel to perform a modern hit song and dance, and then people will be shocked. It's funny now that I think about it. After all, the two eras are not only separated by time and space but also by culture. Some people agreed with Jiang Pingji's opinion, but naturally, there were also people who disagreed. Dolly Buting, a prostitute is a prostitute. No matter how talented she is, she still depends on being F***ked for money. No matter how nice it sounds, she is still a whore. What do you mean, host? When people mock you, you act like your tail was stepped on and you can't wait to whitewash yourself. I can guess that you used to be in this kind of business, right? These days, all kinds of lowly people can transmigrate and become a lady from a rich family. With a change of body, people can't smell your pretentious aura? Jiang Pingji read the comments, but the smile on her face did not disappear. It was not that she had good self-restraint. In fact, her temper had always been terrible. It was just that people could not see the bullet screen in the streaming room. If she suddenly lost her temper, it would definitely scare Xia and Chun'er who were sitting beside her. It would not be good to scare beautiful women for the sake of a few ignorant people. She was too lazy to pay attention to them, lest she lowered her status. Facts speak louder than words. She would make them shut up. Time seems to pass very quickly when I'm with Lang Jun. Xia held a cup of wuhong soup that Jiang Pingji had specially ordered. She drank it, which greatly relieved the pain in her abdomen. Her pale face became a little rosier, and her eyes became more watery. Jiang Pingji heard the sound of the night watch outside and silently calculated the time. If you don't mind, can I come visit often? When it comes to poetry, even many of my classmates are not as accomplished as you two ladies. Jiang Pingji smiled sincerely. She said she would come to visit and she really meant it. If the court allows women to become officials with your talents, you two will definitely be able to get a seat. When that time comes, you might even be able to become officials of the same court. Jiang Pingji's last sentence was mostly a joke, but the first sentence was a real compliment. Xia blushed, but her eyes were clear. She said, Lang Jun, you're making fun of me. I only read classics and history when I'm free. How can I compare to your classmates? Moreover, this is a brothel. Lang Jun, you have a beautiful woman in your backyard, so you should stay away from this place. Rimu Xiang, the host's charm can even tempt the ladies in the brothel under smiley face 3, angle, underscore Chenqiu Yu Bi Wujiang Zhakai. I know why the host doesn't want to be single. It must be so that others can't be single. flirting with all the ladies and raising their standards of choosing a husband so that most men can't be single. How sinister. Fanghuajiu, host, can you get that idiot Dali to stop talking? He's so noisy that I can't watch the stream. Host V, if others want to bark like dogs and show off their manners, why should we stop them? The audience was speechless. What she said made sense and they were speechless. Ladies, why do you have to belittle yourselves? Jiang Pingji said with a smile, just wait and see. Maybe in the future women will really become officials and enter the court. Xia and Chun were both focused on the word wife, and did not pay much attention to the latter part of the sentence. Women entering the court as officials? It might have been possible during the period of the 16 kingdoms or the early years of the Xia dynasty. However, during the Xia dynasty, more and more women were confined to their chambers and backyards. In the current 5 kingdoms, the phenomenon was getting more and more serious. It was even said that in Zhongzhou, which was the most powerful country in China, women could no longer show their faces in public or remarry. At home their father was the king. After marriage their husband was the king. If their husband died their son would be the king. If they lost their virginity they would drown. If they went out they would be accused of indecency. Chapter 102. Longjuan's mouth is so sweet that it has entered my heart. A hoarse old woman's voice came from the door. Jiang Pingji frowned and Chun thought she was unhappy. Why would anyone disturb us at this hour? Nothing out of the ordinary happened, but to outsiders, the 2 ladies had entered the room to serve her. Normally no one would disturb them. Otherwise, what if the guests were to be interrupted when they were in high spirits? What would they do if they became impotent? Xia stood up and smiled. Langjun, don't be angry. I'll go take a look. As he finished speaking, he folded his sleeves and left. The sound of the door being pushed open could be heard, followed by Xia's doubtful reply. After a while, Xia came in with a bitter smile. She said in a low voice, that was the maid who cleaned the courtyard. She said that a girl ran away. The pimps in the building couldn't catch her. Someone suspects that she is hiding in one of the ladies' rooms. Is that why we have to search your room? Jiang Pingji frowned. She knew very well whether there was another person in the room. If we don't search it, people will gossip. Xia sighed. Because she was clean, she was asked to serve the mysterious guest, Wuma Jun. Her life was more comfortable than the other ladies in the brothel. However, it made the top courtesan unhappy. She might want to humiliate Jiang Pingji. Did the brothel keeper agree to it? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and sneered. She knows I'm in this room, but she still asked her to come in. Isn't she trying to spoil the fun? I don't care. I can't be calculative with a brothel keeper. But in the end you are the one who will suffer. Chun and Xia looked embarrassed. Jiang Pingji said cheerfully, let the maid in. You 2 stay here and don't move. Don't let anyone disturb you. After getting permission, the maid led 2 men in gray linen clothes and green headscarves into the room. They rummaged through the room. The noise outside was getting louder. Xia and Chun looked terrified. It's okay. Don't panic. After a while the commotion finally died down. Jiang Pingji stood up and walked out of the screen. She looked at the hunchbacked old woman and asked, Old lady, did you find anyone? The old maid bowed slightly and smiled. Her brown face looked a little greasy under the candlelight. There was a big black mole at the corner of her mouth, which made her look a little wretched. I'm sorry to disturb you. I didn't find anyone. I'll go down now. Jiang Pingji nodded, indicating that she could lead them away. This old maid is so rude. How could she make the room so messy? Although Chun'er had a good temper, she was still a little angry when she saw the makeup and hairpins that had been messed up on the dressing table. When she thought of how the old woman and the 2 pimps had touched her rouge and face powder, and how dirty it was, she suddenly felt nauseous. Check to see if anything is missing. Xia said gently, Mom always suspects us of hiding money. She knows all the places in this building that are suitable for hiding money. She might take this opportunity to let the old maid come in and take the money away. That reminded Chun-er, but she didn't dare to get up when she thought about Jiang Pingji in the room. Don't worry. Nothing is missing. Jiang Pingji looked around and said with a smile, but there are some things that shouldn't be there. Chun-er blinked. Langjun, you said nothing is missing. What is there? Yes. Jiang Pingji walked around the room twice and took out 2 green-scented sachets from a place that the 2 ladies didn't know about. Which dirty man does this scented sachet belong to? Xia took a look and thought it was something dirty, so she threw it aside. That's not the main point. The things inside are interesting. Jiang Pingji opened the scented sachet and put some strange dried plants inside. She took some out and sniffed it. She frowned and said, "Lady Chun, you know how to make scented medicine. Do you know the effects of these things?" Before Chun was sold to Ingchun brothel, she was the daughter of a doctor. Because of her father's occupation, she knew some medicine. The two ladies looked at each other when they heard Jiang Pingji call them. They stepped forward and examined the scented sachet. They found it familiar. "Don't sniff it for too long. It's bad for your brain." Jiang Pingji grabbed Chun's fair wrist. "I don't know what this medicine is, but it has the effect of confusing one's mind. If you smell it for too long, it's extremely easy to cause your mind to become muddled, your thoughts to be muddled, and you won't know what's going on." Chun threw the scented sachet back when she heard that. She suddenly remembered something and her face turned red. She spat on the scented sachet and scolded, "Which shameless bastard put this in here? It's one thing for the ladies in the brothel to serve their customers, but how dare those eunuchs covet you? How shameless." Jiang Pingji realized that the scented sachet was probably the knockout drug of this era. Xie gritted her teeth and looked terrified. It must have been those two pimps who released it. Once they entered the brothel, they would be humiliated for the rest of their lives. She had heard other ladies talk about how the pimps who worked in the brothel bullied them. Jiang Pingji smiled. Did the pimps do it? Not necessarily. Host V, something interesting seems to be happening. Are you guys still sleepy? Do you want to watch a good show? Yimi Yangguang, Did you find something? Ichi Sanqing, I'm confused but you're still keeping us guessing. You're so bad. Hongjun Laozu Dijua, I feel like you're trying to stir up trouble. Count me in. I'll watch your stream all night. Huaqua Dijua, you're a real man who's destined to stir up trouble. Hongjun Laozu Dijua, TSK. To be precise, the trouble has already been ruined by you. The audience in the streaming room was excited to watch the show. Jiang Pingji had also made a decision. She turned to the two ladies and said, "You should rest early, especially Xia. Be careful these few days and eat less cold food. Don't be greedy and harm your health. If I'm free, I'll visit you again. If there's any trouble, you can find me at the Lu residence." Fenghua Jiu, I feel like these two ladies are to your liking. Why don't you save them from this hell? Jiang Pingji glanced at the bullet screen and met Xiao's eyes. She nodded at her and said goodbye. Why not? Host V, probably because I can't save them. There are countless prostitutes who are more pitiful than them. If I want to save any of them, how can I save all of them? To really save them, you can't just take them away from here. You have to rebuild their broken backs. To really save them, you have to change the root cause of their current situation. Maybe she could do it. Chapter 103. Jiang Pingji was stunned for a moment when she saw the words soft-hearted and kind-hearted. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Host V, it's the first time someone said I'm soft-hearted and kind-hearted. That was the judgment of the viewers who were separated by a dimensional screen. Because the images they saw were what she wanted them to see, they were easily misled by subjective emotions. But what kind of person was Jiang Pingji in reality? They would find out soon enough. Yimi Yangguang, host, you said you were going to watch a good show. Where is it? Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes and opened the sandalwood fan in her hand. A sly smile blossomed on her face. Host V, don't stop. Watch carefully. You'll be glad that we're separated by a dimensional distance. After sending the bullet screen, Jiang Pingji ignored the viewers who were dumbfounded. She made a detour to the backyard of Ingchun brothel, climbed over the wall, and nimbly hid in the shadows cast by the eaves. She adjusted her breathing rate and controlled her breathing movements to minimize her presence. The viewers in the streaming room were dumbfounded. Jiang Pingji thought about it and asked the system to turn on the infrared camera system at night. From her angle, she could see the corner door of the backyard. Because there was a small artificial hill nearby, the light couldn't penetrate it. As a result, the corner door was unusually dark. Yimi Yangguang, this is what the backyard of a brothel looks like. People come and go. It's quite lively. Now, is the streamer looking for someone here? They're all unfamiliar faces. What's so interesting about it? After waiting quietly for a while, just when everyone's patience was about to run out, a few sneaky figures walked out of the back hall. With the help of the ultra-clear streaming camera, the viewers in the streaming room could clearly see the figures. Some of the viewers who were watching the stream recognized them immediately. Wasn't that the old woman who led the pimps to search Chun'er's room? As they were thinking about it, the old woman bent her back and lowered her head to talk to the two pimps. The three of them seemed to be chatting happily. Jiang Pingji looked at them coldly. The two pimps looked around. One of them took a small silver coin from the old woman's hand. They didn't care that the silver coin was dirty. They put it in their hands and bit it hard. Then they took it out to check if it was real or fake. Then the two pimps looked at each other and waved at the old maid. They separated in different directions. The old maid rubbed her hands against the corner of her linen clothes and continued to hunch her back. She quietly opened the corner door and walked to the alley separated by a wall from the backyard. The audience was puzzled. What was going on? Following that, some of the audience members tried to make guesses after connecting what had happened. Qinshan Mushue, are the three of them splitting the loot? He secretly embezzled the hard-earned money of the prostitutes in the brothel. He felt like a blood-sucking bug. Tudu Feichio, based on my understanding of the host, things are definitely not that simple. Didn't she say that she didn't want to stop just now? She probably wanted to do something to teach you a lesson. Think about the last time she beat a servant to death. Although most of the audience in the streaming room were novices and it was the first time for many of them to enter the streaming room, the video of Jiang Pingji's previous streaming had been spread on the public platform of their dimension. The most bloody video was censored after it was broadcasted. The censored video was the content of the servant being beaten to death. Dolly Buting, I'm not scared. Come at me if you have the ability, bitch. Although the bullet screen was very tough, the audience felt that it was a bluff. At that moment, some of the audience could not help but come back to their senses and dig out what Jiang Pingji had said before. You will be glad that you and I are separated by a dimension. This host is going to tear apart her own audience again? Host V, you are thinking too much. You are not that important. At most, you are just a bonus. Not everyone is qualified for her revenge. Don't think too highly of yourself. While the audience was guessing, the old maid had already turned into the alley. Jiang Pingji got up and chased after her. Stepping on the eaves and walls, she was relaxed and natural as if she was taking a stroll in the park. Not long after, the audience in the streaming room heard a rustling sound coming from the deep alley. With the convenience of the infrared camera at night, the scene in the deep alley was clearly displayed in front of them. Yimi Yangguang, damn host, are you serious? You want us to watch an old woman take off her clothes and see her naked body? In the deep alley, the old maid with a hunched back was taking off her heavy linen clothes one by one. They thought they would see a high-energy scene, but they soon realized that something was wrong. She was wearing too many clothes, wasn't she? As she took off her clothes one by one, the hunched and bloated old maid gradually became thin, until she took off her hair cap, revealing her tightly tied black hair. Only then did the audience realize that she was not an old maid at all. Qinshan Mushue, is this the legendary magical disguise technique? It's even more magical than plastic surgery here. They witnessed the whole process of a hunched and bloated old maid turning into a skinny middle-aged man. When he wiped off the greasy brown unknown substance on his face, a sharp mouth and monkey cheeks were revealed, and a pair of slender rat eyes were particularly bright in the dark night. His face was no longer brown, but it looked like he had been drinking too much. After stuffing the disguise into the gray bag one by one, the man adjusted his clothes, pinched the heavy money bag hanging on his waist, and revealed a satisfied smile. Humming a tune, the man strode out of the deep alley with his head held high. He did not notice that there was a pair of cold eyes staring at him from the wall. Looking at the direction he was going, he should be going to the main entrance of Yingchun brothel. Jiang Pingji sneered. The man heard the noise and turned his head abruptly. He shouted, "Who's there?" "No one." The man frowned. He could not help but wonder if he was being paranoid and had an illusion. However, the next moment something fell on his back. Before he could turn around, he felt a sharp pain in his neck. Staring at the unconscious man for a while, she said with slight disappointment, "It's a small fish." She grabbed the back of the man's collar with one hand and easily dragged him into the deep alley. Squatting beside the man, Jiang Pingji frowned. The audience in the streaming room held their breath, afraid to disturb her thoughts. After a while, she pulled out a snow-white handkerchief from the man's lapel. There was a snow-white and delicate lotus embroidered on it. The owner of the handkerchief was not an adult woman, but an unmarried girl. She was about 10 years old and was not a prostitute. Jiang Pingji closed her eyes slightly and searched for a small bag on the man's waist. There were 7 pearls of the same size and shape. Chapter 104. Looking at what she had found, Jiang Pingji's eyebrows were almost twisted into a knot. She looked at the man with an unfriendly gaze, as if he was not a living person in her eyes, but a corpse that had already turned cold. Love going small, show on net w. Chew on the side. The audience in the streaming room was so curious that they wanted to climb out of the screen and shake her shoulders. Don't keep us guessing. Jiang Pingji did not seem to notice the anxiety of the audience. Instead, she raised her hand and untied the belt around the man's waist. She took out something that was wrapped in something hard from his clothes. She squeezed it and the texture was as she had guessed. She opened it and saw that it was a small roll of bamboo slips. Hongjun Laozu's Juhua. Host, what are the words on it? Sorcerer's girl offing. I remember that it should be some people's names. I also saw some words like XX Lane. I guess it should be a record of where someone lives and their age. But I don't know what the super ugly lines at the bottom mean. Is it a secret of some mysterious organization in the host's hands? Meishu's warrior Ayuan. I envy those who are knowledgeable. I used to know astronomy and geography, but after 4 years in university I feel like I've become illiterate. Smiley face 3, angle, host. I only know 2 words on this bamboo slip. I'm sorry, my language teacher. Jiang Pingji pursed her lips. At that moment, the man who had fainted slowly woke up. Before he could raise his hand to rub the sore spot, he suddenly saw a dark figure squatting beside him. He almost rolled and crawled 2 steps backward. However, he soon found that his belt had been loosened, and his loose pants were no longer tied. As he crawled, he quickly took off his pants below his buttocks, revealing a patch of white. When the night wind blew, it was so cold that he could not help but shiver. At that moment, the monkey-like man could not help but want to cry. He thought that he had only met a robber, but he did not expect that the other party wanted to rob him of his body. Everything happened so suddenly that the audience in the streaming room could not react at all. Their vision was already blocked by a large patch of white. Hongjun Laozu's chrysanthemum. Damn, although I have such an ID, I'm really not interested in a man's chrysanthemum. Now, the streamer's driving skills are really unexpected. The dirty scenes are as fast as lightning. Chenshan Mushue, oh my streamer, you're the death of me. My mom watched the stream with me and now I'm kneeling on the ground. Jiang Pingji was also stunned. She had a disgusted expression on her face. She lifted her leg and kicked the man's left buttocks. The man fell forward like a dog eating its food. He even staggered and rolled twice. The stones on the ground rubbed against his face, leaving several bruises on his face. Being treated like this, the man suddenly felt a surge of anger in his heart. Without caring about fear, he rolled to the side and pulled some distance away. He grabbed his pants tightly with both hands, spat and said fiercely, "Which idiot dares to rob me of my body?" Jiang Pingji was speechless. She didn't need to look to know that the live stream room would be full of ha 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 ha, and use this as a joke to mock her. He robbed me? Hearing this, Jiang Pingji felt as if her fingers had touched the snot of an unknown person. The cold and sticky feeling spread from her fingertips to her whole body. She had goosebumps, which disgusted her. You don't deserve it. He thought it was a homeless man or a desperado who wanted to rob him, but when he heard the voice coming from the darkness, he was startled. That clear and clean voice automatically made the general outline of a handsome young man appear in his mind. Nowadays men were very popular. The business of places like the South Yard Luoguan was even better than the brothels. In the man's mind, he subconsciously recalled his little lover in the South Courtyard's brothel. Not to mention that her body was soft and delicate, her soft and tender skin was extremely good to the touch. Her taste was even more memorable than some clean virgins. For a moment, his courage firmly suppressed the fear and anger in his heart. Oh, it's a young Langjun. Listening to this voice, I don't even need to look at the person. My body is reacting. The man used the hemp rope he found at the last minute as a belt around his waist, but he didn't really run naked. Jiang Pingji's face became more and more gloomy. The man's vision was affected by the darkness, so he could only see a vague outline even with his eyes wide open. However, she could see the undisguised dirty expression on his face, which made her feel disgusted. If you told my brother earlier, he would definitely have sex with you. You wouldn't need to force yourself. Relying on his age and height, the man seemed to be very fearless. He had a lot of good stuff on him, so he was not afraid of the young man with such a young voice and short stature. His reaction just now was because it was too sudden, and he was startled by it. Those who dare to tease me are either not born yet, dead, or on their way to die. Jiang Pingji held the wig that the man used to disguise himself as an old woman. She squeezed it into a ball and punched the man's face. Then she forced the wig into his mouth. At the same time, she hit the man's lower abdomen with her knee, causing a moment of numbness and loss of control of his limbs. No one knew better than Jiang Pingji what kind of force she used to hit which part of the body and what kind of reaction it would produce. Even if Lu Lanting had been a weakling in the past, she would still have been able to subdue him easily, let alone now. How disgusting. Jiang Pingji's wooden clogs were 3 inches below the man's navel. The unspeakable pain in his balls overtook the pain in his face and lower abdomen. The man curled up into a ball, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets and the corners of his eyes were bloodshot. However, he couldn't scream because his mouth was still stuffed with the stinky wig. Saliva flowed out of the wig. Now, I had a feeling that the host crushed my balls and d*ck. It hurt so much. I was so scared that I stuffed Thumbelina into my pocket and felt my little friend. Now I'm being treated as a lunatic by my friends. Fatty Big C, that's nothing. Can you imagine the 8 of us touching each other's crotches? Paydaxing, I can't imagine the 8 of you touching each other's crotches. The male viewers felt like they had been hit by a critical hit, while the female viewers felt like it was a pain in the balls. Of course, the streaming room was a place where crooks and dragons mingled. Apart from those who had a peculiar style, there were other defenders who naturally criticized Jiang Pingji for being ruthless and having no morals. Among them, Don't Stop Dolly criticized her the most viciously. Chapter 105. I originally wanted to give you a quick death, but I didn't expect you to be so eager to go to hell. Jiang Pingji grabbed his collar with one hand and lifted him up easily. She said coldly, "If that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish." The man's face was already green and red from the pain. He didn't hear what Jiang Pingji said at all. His numb limbs didn't listen to him at all. However, I'm someone who likes to squeeze out every last bit of value from people. Since you're still useful, I'll allow you to live in luxury for a while longer. After she finished speaking, Jiang Pingji's eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness. She quickly disappeared as if she had never appeared. Host V. As a responsible host, I think it's not just about broadcasting some boring daily life. I also need to popularize some common sense knowledge to the audience, such as how to make a stubborn duck tell the truth. Young man, have you heard of torture? Jiang Pingji's words piqued the curiosity of some of the more timid viewers. They were obviously scared to death and covered their eyes with their hands, but they still could not resist the curiosity in their hearts. They could not help but secretly open their fingers and peep through the gaps between their fingers to see what would happen next. In the Federation's dictionary, interrogation by torture was different from ordinary interrogation procedures. Those who knew the ropes would most likely shudder at the mention of it. Almost every federal soldier had mastered the essentials of interrogation by torture. As the leader of the army, it was impossible for Jiang Pingji not to learn this skill. Host V. Of course, I don't recommend that you use it in real life because it might kill someone. Host V. If one day you use this method in practice, please don't blame it on me. As she spoke, Jiang Pingji put a relatively clean handkerchief on her hands. Using the man as a teaching tool, she personally taught the live stream audience what a real professional interrogation was. On the surface, it was far less bloody than the so-called 10 great tortures, but in essence, it was more ruthless than those brutal punishments. Not only could it destroy the body, but it could also easily destroy the mind. Even a well-trained genetic warrior would not be able to withstand the full set of torture methods of the Federation, let alone a hooligan with a weak heart from ancient times. Jiang Pingji had only shown a little of her power, but the other party was already on the verge of collapsing. His consciousness was in a muddled state. She took out a flint and burned the handkerchief. The orange light illuminated half of her face. "What's your name?" "Lin Shengdog." The man's eyes were unfocused, and the hair cover in his mouth had been removed. However, there was still a steady stream of turbid saliva flowing down the corner of his mouth. Some dripped onto his upper body, and some flowed down his neck to his collarbone. This scene could definitely drive a germaphobe crazy. Jiang Pingji narrowed her eyes. "You're not a local. Where are you from?" "Meng County, Tsang Prefecture." The man tilted his head and his limbs twitched from time to time. His gaze was blank, but his reply to Jiang Pingji was clear. "Meng County, Tsang Prefecture?" Jiang Pingji frowned and searched through Lu Lanting's memories for information about the place. The land of Dongqing was divided into 6 states and 21 counties. Zhangzhou was one of the more prosperous states. Because the trade route to the north was smooth, it had close connections with the northern borderline. Many merchants went there to do business. Therefore, Zhangzhou's economy was at the forefront of Dongqing. As for Meng County, it was the largest county in Tsang Prefecture and had the richest economy. Apart from you there are a few other accomplices. What are their names? What do they look like? Where are they now? Jiang Pingji asked the last question. It meant that the shifty-eyed man had reached the end of his life. The man answered each question one by one. Jiang Pingji's expression turned cold as if it could freeze a person's heart. Good answer. I'll give you a quick death this time. Jiang Pingji easily ended the man's life. Out of habit, she cleaned up the evidence of the crime. Then, she stood up and left the alley with her usual expression. A figure in green stood at the entrance of the alley. Her clothes fluttered in the night breeze, and the cold moonlight illuminated her figure. Jiang Pingji was not surprised to see Feng Jin. She walked up to him and before he could say anything she had already stabbed him. Don't pretend to be cool when you're thin. Feng Jin was speechless. Be careful. You'll have a headache the next day. Don't blame it on me. Feng Jin took a deep breath to avoid being angered to death. It was easy to get into trouble in deep alleys, not to mention Lang Lang Alley. It was estimated that 10 to 20% of the gangsters and wanderers in Hejin County were gathered there. Those people did not consider the consequences. They did things based on their mood. If Jiang Pingji provoked them they would not be merciful. However, as soon as he thought of Jiang Pingji's strength, his worries changed. It would be fine if she did not take the initiative to cause trouble. Jiang Pingji looked him up and down. Why did you come out? The warm air in the house is much better than the cold wind outside. I wanted to come out for some fresh air, but I didn't expect to meet the two ladies who served you before. I felt something was wrong so I asked. I didn't expect you to be so daring. How could you run around in such a place? If anything happens to you. Feng Jin paused. His gentle face became solemn and serious. His eyes were full of reproach and worry. The person in front of him was not a man. She was a real woman. When a man was bullied, he would at most say that he was flirtatious to comfort himself. However, if a woman got into trouble in such a place, her reputation would be ruined. Jiang Pingji smiled coldly. Something happens? It's good enough if others don't offend me. Feng Jin frowned and suddenly moved closer. His face suddenly darkened. What did you do just now? If you have the guts, you can go in and take a look. He hesitated for a moment, then lit the fire and stepped into the deep alley. After a while he walked out with weak footsteps. You did it? He deserves to die. If he doesn't die, I don't know how many people will be hounded to death, Jiang Pingji said indifferently. Why you accompany me to a place? When you go there you will know whether the person inside deserves to die or not. Or you don't have to come. You can directly go to the magistrate and sue me? Feng Jin pursed his lips. Although the aristocratic families controlled the court and controlled the whole of Dongqing, it did not mean that the children of the aristocratic families were not guilty of killing people. What was the difference between such disregard for the lives of others and the vermin that the people cursed and hated? However, he did not say these words out loud. Because of admiration, Feng Jin's position was still on Jiang Pingji's side. If the other party could produce evidence, he could even let this matter pass. Where are we going? Feng Jin followed and asked, You have to produce evidence that is convincing enough. I won't cover for you. The sound of wooden clogs landing on the ground was particularly clear. It seemed to completely separate the deep alley from the extravagant world outside. Chapter 106. Why are we going to Mr. Wei Yuan's residence? Instead of answering, Jiang Pingji asked, Huaiyu, do you know Meng County in Song Prefecture? Compared to Lu Lanting's closed environment, Feng Jin's tutor was more open. Meng County, Song Prefecture? Of course I have some understanding, but what does this have to do with what happened before? Feng Jin was about to transform into 100,000 Ys. Have you heard of some scandals in Meng County, Song Prefecture? For example, some women from aristocratic families were humiliated, but the culprit was never found. The moment Jiang Pingji opened her mouth, it was big news. Feng Jin's face turned green, red, and black, almost like a palette. Nonsense, how can a gentleman be interested in such news? Moreover, if your words spread out, do you want to be criticized by others? Landowning gentry ladies are noble. Even if it happened, it wouldn't be spread out so easily. He wanted to say that it was impossible, but when he thought of the dangerous experience of the noblewoman in Hejin County, he changed his mind. You're right. Jiang Pingji stopped in her tracks and quickly returned to normal. If such a thing really happened with the current social atmosphere, the possibility of concealing it was far higher than publicizing it. Do you know something? Is it related to that man? Feng Jin hurriedly took 2 steps forward and stood shoulder to shoulder with Jiang Pingji. He then remembered that Jiang Pingji said she wanted to go to Wei Yuan's mansion, and his scalp went numb. "You're still keeping me in suspense?" Feng Jin was very curious. The audience in the live broadcast room expressed that this young man had a bright future. He had asked all their questions. Some old viewers in the streaming room had been following the stream for a long time. They knew that Jiang Pingji was good at analyzing. They were sure that she had found some clues. Otherwise, it was impossible for her to suddenly attack a stranger. However, she refused to explain. Everyone was dumbfounded. Fatty Big C. The man who was forced to take his lunchbox by the host, the bamboo booklet with unknown content, the scandal of a noble lady from Meng County in Song Prefecture being humiliated, the host's teacher, Wei Yuan. When all these clues are connected, it feels extremely scary. Paydaxing, now that you mention it, I seem to have thought of something. Could it be that the host's teacher is a monster in human form? Now, what kind of analysis is that? You can't just let your imagination run wild like that, right? The probability of Mr. Wei Yuan being the victim is much higher. Didn't they say that the gentleman had been on sick leave for a long time? Maybe it had something to do with this. For a moment, a game of You Guess was played in the live broadcast room. Based on the clues revealed by the streamer, they began to make wild guesses. As for which speculations were reliable and which were absurd, Jiang Pingji did not give an answer. Wei Yuan was stubborn and strict. He was strict with his students and never lowered his standards because of their age. Lu Lanting did not like going to the family school, but she did not like studying at home either. Wei Yuan was the main reason. According to Lu Lanting's memories, the little girl respected her teacher very much. However, the teacher was strict and unapproachable. He would often call for a teacher's whip and punish people. This made the sensitive Lu Lanting shy and reserved, and she liked to keep her words to herself. Before Lu Lanting's incident, Wei Yuan had applied for 3 days of leave from the Lu Manor. His illness had worsened and he had to postpone it. Under Taksha's reminder, Jiang Pingji had asked the servants to send gifts to Wei Yuan's manor, but she had never shown up in person. "It's rare for me to go to the teacher's manor, but I have to go through the side door." Wei Yuan's manor was a long way from Langlang Alley. It took Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin a long time to reach it. By then it was almost midnight. The sky was dark and the surroundings were silent. Occasionally they could hear the sound of dogs barking. "If you want to visit, you can come during the day." Feng Jin saw that Jiang Pingji was about to roll up her wide sleeves and climb over the wall. His face became distorted, but he did not dare to raise his voice. He could only suppress his voice. "If you are caught, Wei Yuan was famous for his strictness. If his student climbed over the wall in the middle of the night, it would be fine if it was in the front yard, but if it was in the backyard, it would be like having mud fall into one's pants." Lu Lanting was not afraid of anything, but he still wanted his reputation. A bad friend could ruin his life. Jiang Pingji stood in the corner for a while and smiled at him. "What are you afraid of? Come, I'll be your foothold. You can climb over first." Feng Jin was speechless. They looked at each other in silence for a while. Feng Jin took a deep breath. "I don't believe you're that kind. Tell me, how are you going to trick me?" Feng Jin clenched his teeth. Only now did he look like a teenager instead of an old and steady noble young master of an aristocratic family. Jiang Pingji smiled. "Won't you know after you climb over?" Feng Jin looked at her suspiciously, and the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. "Why don't you climb over first?" There was something fishy going on. Jiang Pingji mocked him. "You go first and I'll follow. What if I climb over first? Will you be able to climb over? Don't pretend to be a hero in front of me." Feng Jin was speechless. It was tiring to have such an unreliable companion. Logically speaking, with Feng Jin's upbringing, he would never mess around with Jiang Pingji. But he was only a teenager. He had to maintain a steady image in front of others, and he needed some breathing space when he was alone. Not to mention that he admired Jiang Pingji and wanted to know what she was up to. He had fallen for her trap. Feng Jin gritted his teeth and nodded in agreement. He had left behind a dark history that could not be erased. Wei Yuan came from an ordinary family. His mansion was simple and the walls were not high. Jiang Pingji lowered her body and crossed her arms, indicating for Feng Jin to step on her. Compared to her decisiveness and straightforwardness, Feng Jin was a bit hesitant. Even though his companion was bold and unrestrained, he always forgot her gender. But no matter how forgetful he was, he could not forget the difference in their genders. "How can you be so impatient?" Feng Jin muttered. He carefully held on to the uneven part of the wall. He had taken off his wooden clogs and was only wearing socks. He stepped on Jiang Pingji's crossed arms with his bare feet. He thought they would fall miserably, but he did not expect his feet to be so steady. He swore that he had never been so rude in his life. He used all his strength to crawl on the wall. Okay, I'm up. It's your turn now, right? Feng Jin looked down from the wall. It was a bit high and he felt dizzy. Under the wall, Jiang Pingji burst into laughter. It was especially obvious in the silent night. Feng Jin's heart skipped a beat. Why don't you take a look at the other side of the wall? Isn't there a bunch of people guarding there? Feng Jin was speechless. He had a bad feeling. He turned his head shakily and stretched his neck to the other side of the wall. Within the walls, they looked at each other. Lucy. He was furious. It's better for you to die than for me. If it doesn't work, then let's die together. Chapter 107. I heard you calling me. You don't have to be so loud. Everyone in the neighborhood knows. Without waiting for Feng Jin to really get angry, Jiang Pingji leaped up and stepped on the wall. Using the momentum, she climbed steadily to the top of the wall. Feng Jin hugged the wall with both of his hands, looking extremely flustered. He looked up at Jiang Pingji with trembling eyes as if he was looking at his enemy. If he had known that Jiang Pingji was very naive, unreliable, he would have foolishly jumped into her trap. It was a great humiliation. Feng Jin was in a dilemma. He wished he could strangle his previous self to death. Sir, please don't blame me. Huayu and I came here today for a reason. We had no choice but to climb over the wall. Jiang Pingji said with a smile. When she jumped into the wall, she conveniently brought Feng Jin, who was clinging to the wall, down. Inside the walls, there were indeed a few servants guarding. Other than that, a middle-aged man dressed in plain clothes stood in front of them like a pine tree. He had a neatly trimmed beard and a pair of dark and gloomy eyes. He stared at Jiang Pingji with some suspicion and scrutiny. That was to be expected. For a student to climb over his teacher's wall in the middle of the night, and at such a sensitive time, anyone would be suspicious. However, Wei Yuan didn't pin the crime on her because her age didn't meet the criteria. In any case, Wei Yuan was still a student that he had personally taught. His student would not be a despicable person. Lanting, you've really harmed me this time. He had made a bad friend by mistake, and his 10 years of good reputation would be ruined in a day. Be good, don't throw a tantrum. Jiang Pingji dismissed him like she was coaxing a child. Feng Jin widened his eyes in astonishment, as if it was his first day meeting Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji bowed to Wei Yuan and greeted him respectfully, Sir. Wei Yuan didn't appreciate it. Instead, he coldly flicked his sleeves and dodged her bow, giving her a cold snort. He did believe that Lu Shi was not a despicable person, but that did not explain why the kid climbed over his wall in the middle of the night. Climbing over the wall was one thing, but observing the conversation between him and the strange young man, Lanting clearly knew that there was someone on the other side of the wall, yet he deliberately climbed over. Knowing one's mistake and making a mistake was even worse. Feng Jin straightened his wide sleeves and did not bother to tidy up his slightly disheveled appearance. He bowed deeply to Wei Yuan. Feng Jin greets Mr. Wei. There is a reason for what happened today. Mr. Wei, please calm down and wait for Lanting's explanation. Although Feng Jin could not wait to have a showdown with Jiang Pingji, the two of them were on the same boat. Before Wei Yuan's anger was extinguished, they had to work together and not drag each other down. Feng Jin? Your surname is Feng? But the Feng family of Shangyang? What does Minister Feng Xinda have to do with you? Feng was a rare surname. In Dongqing, when the Feng family was mentioned, most people would subconsciously think of the Feng family in Shangyang. Wei Yuan looked at Feng Jin's clothes and accessories. They were all expensive and hard-to-find treasures. It was obvious that his family was not poor. Feng Jin blushed and felt extremely embarrassed. He couldn't answer, but he also couldn't not answer. In the end, he blushed and said in a voice as soft as a mosquito, I am from the Feng family of Shangyang. The minister is my father. Wei Yuan was speechless. Faced with Wei Yuan's almost indifferent expression, some of the quick-witted spectators quickly moved their fingers, drowning his face in the barrage of insults. Now, oh my God, the son of the minister came to my house. Fatty Big C, blue skinny Xianggu, this guy's background is too big. How should we deal with him? Urgent, waiting online. Hongjun Laozu's Juhua, don't be fooled by my nonchalance. I'm actually burning with anxiety. How can I maintain my cold and aloof image? This guy in front of me doesn't play by the rules. I can't beat his father. Urgent, waiting online. Of course, there were also some insults in a more bizarre style. Sorcerer's girl offing. That guy is the son of the minister of Shangyang. Despicable, truly despicable. Jiang Pingji thought that Wei Yuan's expression and the barrage of comments made it even more delicious. She was secretly delighted, but her expression did not change. Instead, a chuckle beside her attracted everyone's attention. At that moment, she noticed that there was not only a fully armed servant beside Wei Yuan, but also a young man in his 20s. The man's eyebrows were slightly sharp, and his eyes were dark and lifeless. Being stared at by him made one feel an inexplicable chill in one's heart. His complexion and skin were a bit rough and dark yellow, but his appearance was extremely heroic. Even the gloomy coldness in his eyes couldn't make people ignore the advantage of his facial features. His face was deep and his lips were slightly dry with some white skin curling up. It was like a cracked riverbed that had been dry for a long time. The material of his clothes was not very good and it was a little old. Not only did it not fit him well, but it had also been washed to the point of discoloration. His collar and cuffs were badly worn, but his hair was combed neatly, and he stood tall and straight, so one could not tell that he was in dire straits. He was in his 20s and his wife and widower had died. He had come from the north, and it seemed that he was from a border city near the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. His father was of a different race, and his mother was a gentle and loving Chinese woman. The two of them were not happy, and his father had a bad habit of abusing his wife and children. He was cold and ruthless and he had killed more than one person. His father was already dead and he was probably the one who killed him. His palms were thick, and his knuckles were slightly deformed from years of martial arts practice. He was much stronger than Feng Jin. His socks were bleeding and the wound was on his feet, but he could still maintain his upright posture without a change in expression. She liked his ruthlessness and forbearance. While Jiang Pingji was analyzing him, the young man was also sizing her up. After a long time, the young man shook his feather fan and faced Wei Yuan with regret. Master Gong Chao, it's not him. Wei Yuan's face darkened. A few servants still surrounded Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin, not daring to let their guard down. He trusted his student, so he did not doubt the young man's judgment. But he could not think of a reason why his student would climb over the wall in the middle of the night. Master, I came here today because of an urgent matter. If not, I would not have to resort to such a method. Jiang Pingji didn't mind, but Wei Yuan couldn't bear to see such a shocking act. If this matter were to spread out, who knew what kind of people would talk about it? He would not be able to face anyone and Lu Lanting would be ruined. No matter what the student wanted to talk to him about, he had chosen to climb over the wall instead of using the main door. It would be strange if someone like him could stand it. Feng Jin treated himself as the background and kept his head down. He was implicated by Lu Shi, the scammer, in this matter. Oh, I want to hear what reason you have. Chapter 108. If the student could give in and apologize, Wei Yuan would tolerate it for Lu Shi's sake, no matter how unhappy he was. But now he was so angry that he laughed. He had to hear what the stubborn student had to say. What was so important that she had to climb over the wall in the middle of the night? Jiang Pingji was not afraid at all. Instead, she looked confident. The young man with the feather fan raised his hand. His eyes flashed with interest as he said to Wei Yuan, Master Gong Chao, why don't you go to the main hall and listen to what this young man has to say? It would be best if you could dismiss your attendance. I'm sure this young man will not disappoint you. Wei Yuan was shocked to hear this. However, he was also a wise old man. He quickly composed himself and put on a stern face. Come here. Jiang Pingji stopped him. There is no need to rush. Before I explain, I have a presumptuous request. I hope you will agree to it. This student would like to take the liberty to meet the womenfolk in Sir's backyard, including a group of female servants. Wei Yuan was angered by her insatiable behavior. If it were not for the young man's words, he would have started scolding her. A 12-year-old was considered half an adult in this era. Many of them had their own families. Naturally, Wei Yuan did not see Jiang Pingji as a child. He saw her as an adult man. An adult male had climbed over his wall in the middle of the night and even said that he wanted to see the women in his house. Faced with such straightforward humiliation, it was already a sign of his self-restraint that he didn't lash out at him, kick him out, or send him to the magistrate's office. Love go little Shua, net, Chu. The young man narrowed his eyes and looked at Jiang Pingji. He had an intuition. Master Gong Chao, you'd better agree. This young man did not come with evil intentions. I'm afraid it is for your own good. Wei Yuan, who had been furious, calmed down by the young man's words. This change made Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin look at him carefully. Jiang Pingji had exposed the young man's past. The young man felt a chill in his heart, but he could not tell why. Wei Yuan's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and agreed. Just listen to Wenjing once. Jiang Pingji laughed to herself. It seemed that the teacher's sick leave was fake, and the haunting in the backyard was real. According to this person's temperament, if he found out that there were strange men's clothes or traces of activity in his concubine's room, he would be so angry that his blood pressure would soar. The reason why he had taken leave until now was probably because he had not finished with this mess. He wanted to catch the adulterer, but he ran into her? Wei Yuan walked in front with big strides. Jiang Pingji followed behind him at a steady pace. She was right next to the young man. She smiled and asked tentatively, "How should I address you, Langjun?" Feng Jin's expression seemed normal, but there was a hint of displeasure in it. His bad friend had tricked him, and before he could even give him an explanation, he had already hooked up with a weird-looking outsider. How unfair. I am Qiguan Rang. Jiang Pingji frowned. Although she hated the messy names in this era, she still asked out of habit. What's your courtesy name? The young man's eyes were still gloomy and he said mercilessly, My young friend, our relationship is shallow. We don't even have a courtesy name. In other words, he said, I don't know you that well. Don't try to get close to me. Jiang Pingji's heart skipped a beat. She lowered her voice and asked at a volume that only she, the young man, and Feng Jin could hear. Don't say that. Strictly speaking, you are my future brother-in-law. Why do you have to treat me like an outsider? Feng Jin listened attentively and then he looked confused. Lanting has a sister? After asking, he came back to his senses. Lu Shi did have a mistress's daughter, but she seemed to be less than 9 years old. Feng Jin was dumbfounded. However, when her words fell into the young man's ears, it was no different from a sudden clap of thunder. His mind went blank for a moment. You? She interrupted him and repeated her question. What's your courtesy name? If she wanted to know, she had to know. Even if he did not want to answer, she would find a way to make him answer. The young man was speechless. After a while, the young man calmed himself down and said calmly, Didn't you hear him? Jiang Pingji raised her eyelids and rolled her eyes. It's different when you introduce yourself and when others mention it in passing. The young man took a deep breath and faintly sympathized with Feng Jin. That must be how he felt when he was tricked. My name is Qiguan Rang. My courtesy name is Wenjing. How should I address you? Lu Shi. That's it? The young man waited for a while, but he did not hear anything else. His expression became slightly twisted as he suddenly remembered Feng Jin mentioning Lanting. That must be Lu Shi's courtesy name. Although they had only met for a short while, the young man had the urge to raise his fan and slap her. She was asking for a beating. Jiang Pingji looked at Wei Yuan's silhouette in front of her with a complicated expression. Wenjing, are you curious about how I know that you are looking for a son-in-law? Qiguan Rang nodded. He was indeed curious. Wei Yuan had only mentioned it to him vaguely and no one else knew about it. Jiang Pingji revealed it as soon as she arrived, so it was impossible for Qiguan Rang not to be curious. Could she be eavesdropping? That was impossible. Jiang Pingji was about to speak, but she suddenly turned to Feng Jin and said, Don't listen to indecent things. Cover your ears. Feng Jin was speechless. He was innocent. Although he was also curious, since Jiang Pingji had said so, the inside story was probably not suitable for people other than Qiguan Rang to listen. He obediently raised his hands to cover his ears and purposely took a few steps back to prevent himself from accidentally hearing something. His pitiful appearance instantly aroused the sympathy of a group of otakus overflowing with motherly love in the live broadcast room. Gifs flooded the screen like a stream of water. Seeing that, Jiang Pingji wanted to bully Feng Jin even more. What should she do? Wenjing's arrival at the Wei residence was not at the right time. It coincidentally happened to be a scandal that outsiders should not listen to. Jiang Pingji whispered the contents that shocked Qiguan Rang. This content is not only related to Master Wei's concubines in his harem. More seriously, it may even implicate his daughters who are my 2 junior sisters. Thinking about it, even if the 2 ladies are fine, their reputations will be ruined in a day. Following that, Jiang Pingji calmly revealed a series of high-powered information. Wenjing, you lost your wife at a young age and you were born in the border of the northern borderline. The people there are tough and they don't care much about a woman's reputation. At least, they don't care about it as much as the noble sons of Dongqing's aristocratic families. With such a thing happening, no matter if it's the eldest or the second lady, I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to get married in the future. If such a thing happened to the daughters of the aristocratic families, it would not be too difficult for them to get married. Of course, they could not be picky about the conditions of their husbands. They could either marry a son of the first wife with a slightly higher status, or a son of a concubine who was hardworking and talented but had a lower status. Chapter 109. Mr. Wei understands this. He doesn't want to ruin the rest of his daughter's life, but he also doesn't want them to live the rest of their lives in solitary confinement, so he has to find another way out. He thinks highly of your talent and admires you. He might even want to betroth his daughter to you. Now that this has happened, there's no way he'll let you go. I said you're his future brother-in-law. What's wrong with that? Qiguan Rang was silent for a while. Or rather, he was speechless. The young man named Lu Shi's analysis was correct, but he still had a few doubts. Jiang Pengji moved closer and said mysteriously, "It's the first lady, right?" Qiguan Rang glanced at her. He had one more doubt. He walked away quickly, not wanting to see the gossipy expression on Jiang Pengji's face. He wanted some peace and quiet. Lovelorn front Lianming, why does he feel sorry for Qiguan Rang? The streamer exposed his secrets the moment they met. I guess he's feeling a little uneasy. I don't care if Dali doesn't stop or if he's glad. I'm glad I don't live in an environment where there's no streamer. Even though it was fun to watch the live stream and they could even complain about it on the bullet screen, watching the streamer bully others or tear apart her own viewers, it was all from the perspective of a bystander. It was just a show to kill time. If there was such a person in real life, it would be horrifying to see through one's secrets the moment they met. A secret is a secret because only a few people know about it. However, Jiang Pengji's actions broke this rule. Naturally, it would cause others to be afraid and ostracize her. She doesn't play by the rules. Secrets have nowhere to hide from her. She's a monster. Love 100%. I checked the surnames on Baidu. If it's a surname, it should be Qiguan, right? Tong Chi 2 times. 100 Ghost Night Walk. Smiley face triangle. I'm just an ordinary person. I'm happy watching, so I don't think too much. Tudu Feichio, same. As long as you're happy. We're just watching the live stream. Why think so much? Streamer Jing Xianghua, we're watching the live stream from the streamer's perspective. The viewing experience should be from the streamer's perspective and role. If it was a stupid host who got bullied and stepped on everywhere, who would be able to watch it? Anyway, I'm feeling all sorts of good now. Streamer's side of me, 23333 after watching the live broadcast, I feel like my IQ has increased by several %. Streamer's back on me, who's better at topping up IQ? Palace Intrigue live stream helps you. Jiang Pengji was speechless. No matter what, she couldn't face these demonic audiences and their IDs. Although Feng Jin did not hear what the two of them said, he could not help but remember how Jiang Pengji had threatened him when he saw Qiguan Rang's reaction. Suddenly, he felt sympathy for her and complained to her, "You scared him. You're scared just like that? What shall we do then?" She said significantly. "Shall we have to be alarmed every day?" Lao Siji Lianming, who's so surprised? Jiang Pengji was speechless. He had a bad premonition. Even though Wei Yuan was extremely unhappy, he still followed Jiang Pengji's instructions and asked the womenfolk to come out and look at them through the thin screen. She frowned and shook her head. Wei Yuan's face darkened and he ordered the maidservants to bring them back. Next were the female servants. The female servants were not as refined as the female servants, and it was fine for them to be stared at by an outsider once or twice. Therefore, they were simply allowed to gather in a relatively wide corridor. The surrounding servants each held a torch, brightly illuminating the courtyard. Feng Jin saw that she was serious and did not dare to interrupt her thoughts. Qiguan Rang looked at Jiang Pengji seriously, as if he was trying to read some useful information from her face. However, the result surprised him. He was a 12-year-old boy, the age when his emotions should be the most exposed. Even if he had been educated by an aristocratic family, his age and experience made it impossible for him to be as impenetrable as an old fox. People would always be able to find a loophole. But the boy's situation made him tremble with fear, and he was secretly very excited. The more he could not find out, the more it meant that the boy was full of secrets. In Qiguan Rang's opinion, there were two extraordinary people in Dongqing in recent years. One was Master Yuanjing of Langya, who single-handedly took back the 3 cities by the border. The other was Liu Shi of Hejin, who had worked hard for many years to bring Hu County back to life. He had achieved a feat that many capable officials of the previous Xia dynasty could not achieve. Liu Shi was Liu Shi's son. He had the demeanor of his father, but he was also a hidden person. Lanting, what did you find out? It was rare for Qiguan Rang to put on a stiff smile. The corners of his lips were raised unnaturally. Perhaps he was used to wearing a cold expression all year round. The emotion of smiling was too foreign to him. Therefore, when he smiled, it was more of a fake smile. It was strange and treacherous. Of course I found out. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to answer to the master today, would I? After she finished speaking, Jiang Pingji got up and walked to the corridor. She walked straight into the crowd of servants, her eyes fixed on one target. It was a woman who looked to be in her early 30s. Her skin was brown, and there were 3 wrinkles between her eyebrows. There were obvious wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. She looked a few years older than her actual age. Her shoulders were slightly bowed and she looked extremely honest. Her fingertips that were exposed outside her sleeves were red and purple. Before she was called there, she was diligently washing clothes with well water. At first glance, she was just an ordinary servant. She had the dullness and diligence of an honest person. There was nothing special about her. If there was anything wrong with her, it would be that her appearance was average, but her facial features were kind. She gave people a feeling that she was easy to get along with. However, some people were born with a strong affinity. That could not be used as evidence that there was something wrong with her. Qiguan Rang quickly glanced at the target Jiang Pingji was staring at. He was slightly suspicious. Why did she look for a servant? Could it be? Qiguan Rang's eyes turned quickly. His eyes were wide open because of the answer that flashed in his mind. So that was the truth. Qiguan Rang's eyes flashed. He opened his mouth and said, "Catch that woman." Jiang Pingji walked toward her. The servant kept her head down as if she was the most ordinary servant. There was no flaw in her expression. However, her nerves were secretly on edge. Until Jiang Pingji was in front of her, her nerves were already at their most sensitive. At that moment, Qiguan Rang's voice exploded in her ears. Or rather, he was completely flustered. He knew that his identity was exposed and he did not mean to trick him. "You still want to escape?" The person panicked. He quickly grabbed a servant beside him and pushed him toward Jiang Pingji. The crowd was in an uproar. The order was instantly chaotic. Chapter 110. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Before the crowd could recover from the shock, they were plunged into another wave of fear. Someone's dead. No one knew who shouted, but the crowd was as quiet as chickens. They silently retreated, forming a large circle. "What are you shouting for? She's not dead yet." Jiang Pingji scolded. The crowd could not help but move to the sides to make a path for her. The maid who was pushed had just woken up from the scare. She was distracted just now and suddenly felt a huge force pushing her in another direction. For a moment, she was so scared that her heart almost jumped out of her throat. Then she fell steadily into a thin but strong embrace. She raised her head shyly and stole a glance at Jiang Pingji's appearance. From this angle, she looked as delicate and pretty as a lady. She thought blankly. Then, as if she had touched a fire, she quickly left Jiang Pingji. "Thank you for saving me, Lang Jun." Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. She did not dare to raise her voice. "It's good that you're fine. You and the rest of the servants should go and rest. It's best if you forget what happened tonight." Jiang Pingji stared coldly at the servant, who was lying on the ground, her hands covering her bleeding neck. Her voice was cold as ice. The maid did not care. She timidly glanced at Mr. Wei Yuan. After getting his approval, she followed Jiang Pingji's orders. After all, they were not servants of the Lus. If they listened to Jiang Pingji's orders without hesitation, Wei Yuan would probably feel uncomfortable. This is clearly a woman. Wei Yuan only left his trusted butler behind. The rest of the servants and servants were dismissed. Jiang Pingji saw the sandalwood fan that she had thrown and cut the servant's neck. She bent down to pick it up and wiped the blood off with a handkerchief. How could it be a woman? "If you don't believe me, why don't you take off all your clothes and check?" Wei Yuan nodded and signaled for the butler to help. Jiang Pingji looked down and stood aside. She was like a spectator in the livestream room. However, the viewers in the livestream room were not calm. They saw the butler roll up his sleeves and touch the servant's crotch. He seemed to pinch it. His face scrunched up like a chrysanthemum flower, and then a look of horror appeared on his face. The scene was too intense. Everything happened too suddenly. They were so shocked that they forgot to comment. Hongjun Laozu's chrysanthemum, */w***. Oh, my eyes are going blind. First, the host had stepped on the other party's balls and **ck. Then, an elderly man had touched a woman, who looked like a middle-aged woman. Today's live broadcast was too dirty. Streamer Zhengxiao Shangguo, I don't care about anything else. I just want to know how it feels. Although the live stream was very dirty, the old driver in the live stream room seemed to be even dirtier. Things like moral integrity were lost after a while. The system, which had not said anything for a while, was bad. The system translator. Lu editor. The viewers in the live stream room are so dirty. Can I control their mouths and their hands? As a system, it's your dereliction of duty if you don't censor or censor certain words. What does that have to do with me? Jiang Pingji pushed the blame away. The system, she sounded reasonable. It could not think of a reason to refute her. While they were bickering, the old butler stood up and walked to Wei Yuan's side. He nodded solemnly. It's really a man. Wei Yuan almost fainted from anger when he heard the answer. He did not have any impression of the servants in the backyard, but he knew that those who did laundry had the right to enter the inner and outer courtyards. In other words, the culprit who bullied his concubine, made him a cuckold and ruined his daughter's reputation was the wailing bastard in front of him. He was still angry when he remembered that he had accidentally found a male object when he was resting in his concubine's room. What made him feel even more humiliated was that the scandal had already reached the ears of someone who should not have known. Qiguan Rang was the son-in-law that he had his eyes on. He came from a poor family and had a rough life. He was also a widower who had lost his wife. Although his eldest daughter was a bit of a loss, it was not shameful for her to be with him. He had observed Qiguan Rang for a long time and felt that he could be trusted. Since Qiguan Rang was his future son-in-law, even if it was shameful, it was still his family. For the sake of his poor daughter, he was willing to let go of his pride. What harm was there in enduring it? His student Lu Shi was also involved. He seemed to be in the know. Otherwise, how could he explain the kid's actions that night? Was he going to make Lu Shi his son-in-law as well? What was more depressing was that if the kid had not climbed over the wall in the middle of the night, the fake woman in front of them would have escaped and they would not have been able to find the culprit. Therefore he couldn't blame himself, but if he didn't blame himself he would be holding back his anger, and he would always feel embarrassed. His illustrious reputation had been completely thrown away tonight. As he thought about it, Wei Yuan's usually straight back could not help but slump a little. It was as if he was in his twilight years. Even though Feng Jin did not know what had happened, based on the information that Jiang Pingji had revealed in her reaction, he could roughly guess the truth. When the housekeeper confirmed that the servant was a man, he wished he had been blind. Lu Shi, this naive and sweet, unreliable friend of his, had actually dragged him into this kind of scandal. Even though he was able to keep his mouth shut, Wei Yuan was probably already holding a grudge against him. It would have been fine if Feng Jin didn't move, but once he did, Wei Yuan noticed him. Wei Yuan was speechless. Oh, I forgot there's another one. Streamer sighed Xianghua. Even though I know I shouldn't laugh at a time like this, I can't help but want to laugh. This Master Wei Yuan is so unlucky. His wives and concubines are being bullied and he's being cuckolded. Streamer's back Xianghua. Even though I want to laugh too, I'm more concerned about my wives and concubines. Yes, they were watching the live stream for fun. To put it simply, they were watching the gossip of others for entertainment. But the person at the center of the incident might not be so happy. Needless to say, Wei Yuan seemed to be an old-fashioned ancient Confucian. His wives and concubines were touched by a man outside. Even if he was still innocent as an ancient man, he would definitely have a knot in his heart. So, what about the unlucky women in the backyard? Based on the streamer's conversation with Qiguan Rang, Wei Yuan treated his daughters well. He was willing to plan for the rest of their lives for them. But wives and concubines were not daughters. It was a matter of a man's dignity and the color of his hat. How could he be so kind? It was one thing to watch the spectacle, but it was another thing to feel sympathy or not. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.